Episode 245, Trade Deadline. How do the MLB trade deadline moves affect you rest of season and, more importantly, beyond in your dynasty, keeper, and contract leagues? It's time for Dingers.
This is Dingers, way more than fantasy baseball. We keep it real when we talk and knock it straight out the park. Let's see the stats. What's the average draft position? What kind of plays you making? Check the wins above replacement. Check the lineups and the points. This I gotta see. What's your path to victory? Are they aiming for a dynasty? Get points going head to head. Please don't do me no favors. We're always watching waivers. Ain't no minor league. This is major. Yeah, Dingers. Let's go.
Welcome to Dingers, the only fantasy baseball podcast for smart people. It's not just Jake Berger that wins you championships. That's why week in and week out, we're delivering tips and strategies to help you live that straight up OG lifestyle. Tyler Childs, joined as always by Robbie Baseball from the Murder Room. How are you doing, Robbie?
Day and night. Ding, ding.
Yeah,
we cover baseball. Does it feel
we were just
right?
reliving our younger days in the Kid Caddy soundtracks earlier before we jumped on here. So,
like if that was yours, mine was. I go back a little further into the not gangster rap of Trick Daddy. So I had a 90. You were talking about Volkswagen. I had a 92 Volkswagen Golf diesel when I worked at a resort in Michigan, Treetops, and I put 6x9s in the back that were, I'm sure just like moments away from shattering that back windshield or back window. And then I had a 12-inch subwoofer, Sony Explode, like the cheap version, whatever. You couldn't afford it. I couldn't afford at the time the high-end audio stuff. But anyway, I had it and it rocked that little car, but it would be Trick Daddy,
Nothing says golf course employee like a big boomer's rolling through the parking lot while everyone's trying to play golf, right?
Oh no, I'm first one there. I'd be like between 5 and 5:30 in the morning. That's why I could blare it, and then it's when I'm trying to leave at the end of the day.
That's what I was. Yeah. That's what I was getting. At. Yeah, it's definitely the leaving for sure. Well, it's like Christmas today though, right? And I mean, it's trade deadline day. There's a lot going on. Maybe less for some teams, maybe more for some teams. If you're a Mets fan, you're just crying in a corner somewhere. Wishing for nice things.
You did get a few nice things, and we'll talk about who they are. But generally speaking, I mean, what a bust of a year it's been, and at least they officially mailed it in.
Right? It's going to be funny, these guys. Yeah, and we'll get into it more. But like the one thing I just want to say right off the top is like they're going to try to sell this like this was the plan, or at least the backup plan. And there's no way that this was the plan. This is like,
oh god, no.
that didn't work. Now let's just try and spin this as positively as we can. Because, like, for me, the Francisco Lindor contract is going to be a monster. Like, that thing is just going to suck more and more by the day. I don't know if anyone remembers Mr. Reyes a la Toronto Blue Jays back into that contract, but there's a very similar pathway that might be ahead of Mets fans here.
Yeah, it's when we get to it, because as we go through, we're going to break down the moves that we think are fantasy relevant. Of course, we're focusing on dynasty contract keeper league. There's 100 places out there doing their redraft podcast, telling you about the 8 guys that are going to make an impact, and they're going to guess on the 20 guys that were in other random trades they'd never heard of before. Ty, it's incredible to me that if you listen to Redraft Fantasy Baseball podcasts, there are guys who have no clue about prospects that have been legitimate for years and years. Guys who were drafted in second and third rounds 3, 4, 5 years ago who are slowly making their way up because they never focus on it. There's just top 150 players and heavy repetition and this and that. And it's like, Jake Berger, someone they never heard of before last year when he got called up and he's, don't worry about this guy. And then this year it's kind of like, oh, look at this Jake Berger impact bat. And, we'll get into that trade, but since you mentioned him off the top, it's been eating at my craw. Listening to a couple of redraft podcasts because I try to give new ones a shot when I see them pop up. A lot of them are just the same, 25 guys inside the fantasy baseball mafia who are now just churning different podcasts out, right? It's, they get a couple guys get together and now from other podcasts, they're now podcasting together with their own podcasts. And it's just, they're watering the same fields over and over again. So, enough trashing on those guys, more time for us to drink, right?
A long time ago,
someone decided to put stuff in glass bottles. In some of these bottles, they put juice or milk, and that was stupid. Today, only alcohol and a few other products remain in the containers from the gods. It's time for beers and bourbon, because good advice only comes in a bottle.
Well, that was quiet.
Yeah, I kind of muffled it a little. Big, huge hands around the cork. Didn't do it right.
You'll hear this one.
That sound, was that a mini can?
No, it's an extra big can. Oh, I even got the vice grip.
Oh, you got the silencer on though.
Yeah. I'm just trying to keep them a little cooler if I can, because of course tonight, because we're going with the trade deadline, happy, exciting topics. I thought I'd go with the Crown Float.
Well, one thing I want to start with, Robbie, just because I think it's a fun way to start this episode, because there's so much that happened today news-wise. Like, I just want you to say, like, what was your favorite thing that happened to this trade deadline? And you can go back within reason a week or two that you would consider like trade deadline stuff. What's your favorite thing that happened at this deadline?
The Angels and Cubs combined both saying, F it, we're not selling, we're adding.
Yeah.
Just generic ads from teams that were on the fence. And all the Ohtani news. I mean, I said, on the Twitter about a week or so ago that I would understand the Angels trading him. And I would understand the Angels trading him to a team like Baltimore, who want to acquire someone very much like Toronto did when they finally were ready to, break the playoff drought in 2015. And they went and acquired David Price, right? They gave up 4 legitimate potential future pieces of that. 2 of them kind of had brief periods of success, but that's what happens when you buy and sell prospects. But they did get in the playoffs, and David Price was elite, and then he immediately left. Toronto went to Boston, which is very much what I thought was going to play out if the Orioles had for some reason acquired Ohtani, is that he would then leave and go to possibly Boston and or New York this offseason. But instead, the Angels said, we got to give this a shot, and they are. And we're going to talk about all the deals they've made over the past week, which is, to me, as important to – that's one of the things that always has bugged me way back when I used to be a Jays fan, before I went with Dipoto and the smarter way to do baseball, was why is Toronto not repeating the footprint from 15? Why are they not getting multiple bullpen pieces when they should be? And we can talk about who they did add in, when we get to it. But again, this year, they repeated that same pattern to me. The one thing they did do that scares me was the De Jong ad. And we can get to that one, because that just tells me that we got big problems with Bobo. Bobo's got a boo-boo. And
so we can get to that a little bit.
You.
Yeah, and there'll be lots we'll cover today that people will question because they always disagree with us, and then we always end up being somewhat borderline accurate on the future. So if you have anything that you have a quarrel with, remember you can get us at Dingers Pod or at Robbie Baseball 1 or at Tourney Boss if you want to air your grievances. But we'll get into that conversation, Robbie, because like normal, we're going to disagree on that one. But let's just go through some of the bullets. Hot news. Let's get moving. Andrew Painter, no Tommy John, or is Tommy John?
No shock, Tommy John. It's no shock to Tommy John. Look at that poor tie. I just would like to point this out. Anyone, go to the YouTube channel.
Did that get announced today? Andrew
no,
Painter?
That was announced a few days ago. Painter,
I
Tommy John. That's why I have it leading off. Like I put the note here. Ty will tell you to buy low, but I ask you to remember the Max Mayer top prospect to forgotten prospect path and wait until at least the winter before you go looking to acquire at your trade deadlines. Let other starting pitchers, Skeens and company, let them all emerge. Let guys who are drafted go get 12 innings, in A-ball or whatever. And then Meyer syndrome will hit Painter, and he's going to dip a little bit. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of prospect guys who are going to be like, well, Daniel Espino, we got really high on, and he's done nothing but get hurt. Is that going to be kind of what's happened with Painter? You can look at Sixto Sanchez as another example of that with injury stuff. So I could see the fade on the prospect. And I know, Ty, you'll talk positively about Painter. I'm just saying don't go out right now because the news is bad. Be like, at my trade deadline, I'm going to go and get me some painter. I'm just saying wait, but definitely, get ready to circle the wagons to go get him.
There's nothing about a high-end prospect that had command that scares me about Tommy John anymore. I just think we're past that window of time where Tommy John was a potential like career changer, right? Like you look at the number of kids that are getting it before they're even drafted these days. I just don't see it as much of a problem as it once was. So, I mean, I'm definitely buying Painter anywhere and everywhere I can. It sucks if he was part of your rebuild strategy because you got to wait another year. We all expected we would see him this time this year, based on his trajectory, what he was on. So that's a disappointing part. But I mean, these things happen, and this is why when you talk about building your teams, like you really got to know pitching to build your team around pitching, right? And you know, Robbie, that I do this all the time with pitching. Like I build my team's pitching heavy. I always have, always will. But that's because that's what I know. I know it inside and out, and it's easy for me to replace and pick up breakout guys. So I'm not worried about this, but like anybody that wants to go get Andrew Painter, like this is a good time to do it. Like you've still got a lot of leagues that have trade deadlines in the next couple of weeks. I love this. If you're out of it, in a big league on a rebuild team, I'm not going to get him if I'm ready to win next year. That's where I'm not doing it. But
I just think the price is going to be too high right now. That's all. That's my caution is don't avoid him, but certainly don't go out directing your trade aim at him right now because it's too fresh in the mind of the guy who's got him. Because like you said, Ty, they were drooling thinking like he's coming. He's going to be up this year. And then with Yuri Perez coming up, it was like, oh man, why wouldn't they? Right? Everyone's going to take the reins off. And then Philly's rotation certainly could have used him healthy. It would have saved from trade we'll talk about shortly needing to be made. But that's it for me on
the only
that.
The only thing I'll say though, Robbie, is that if you got a team that's in contention in your league and you're in a bigger format, like I think that's the right time to go after Painter because it might be the only time that person's willing to sell. Because if they go a year from now and they're ready to rebuild because their championship window went through, right? Like you don't want to miss the chance to buy. So you really it's league dependent, it's team dependent. Like make the read, but definitely don't be afraid to buy. But like Robbie's saying, if the guy's not in contention, like he's not likely to sell. Right. So that's just the reality. So moving on. This one probably hurts you a little bit, Robbie, to see the fall from grace here of Sir Jared Walsh, once a staple of a couple of your teams. I'll hand that one to you.
Just a dynasty diamond. Jared Walsh DFA'd. He, has had injuries, and from the injuries, he's clearly lost the ability to play MLB baseball. He's since cleared waivers and accepted an outright assignment now off the 40-man for the Angels, which means best case scenario for him would be devastating things to the Angels that they would put him back on the roster. But with all the moves they've made, which again, we'll dive into shortly, I don't see him coming back this year. And I'm not sure what his contractual status will be as far as the offseason, if he can become a free agent or not. But this might be the end of Jared Walsh as a dynasty asset. Not that he was one or much of one for the last year and a half. But once upon a time, he was a budding late arrival to MLB. And sometimes these guys come up and have very short windows of success, 2-3 years. And Scooter Gennett's, one of those prime examples we talk about here when we get into these type of guys where they come up late. They have pockets where you get excited, but they're not able to sustain long-term. Not everybody can be Jose Bautista.
And Jared Walsh could have a very successful career in Japan. Like, I mean, that could be the path for him. Like,
might be where the money is for sure. Yep.
The power bat could play over there for sure. So I think that might be there's some cases that like guys can actually be very successful. This might be one of them. Next up, Sal Frelick's up. We haven't had a chance to comment on this one since the last episode. Fun fact. Thank you, Baseball Reference, for providing nicknames. His is the Hit Collector, which doesn't exactly fit on a jersey, but like, you got to be a certain kind of hitter to get that nickname.
They'll have to take that off for 2023 because he has not been the hit collector or the dinger smacker. He's got one in the show, but 269 average in 26 at bats so far. I would say he's holding his own. What's my favorite part? Of course, you're wondering, Ty. 8 walks.
No, I'm not. I know.
5 strikeouts.
Yeah, no, I knew what it was.
Yeah. So Sal Frelick, who I only have in one dynasty league, and it's actually the only dynasty league. Ty was going to comment on the Painter thing with it, but It's the only dynasty league that I chose to build with a lot of prospect pitchers, and it's been very slow. Sal Frelick is on that team. You know who else is on that team? New Los Angeles Angel, Randall Grichuk, who we have not been mentioning enough on this podcast, and we will get to him later, but I just wanted to break the ice on the first Grichuk mention. Gabriel Moreno of the Diamondbacks to the IL. Unfortunate, since the Diamondbacks decided that they are going for it, and that's very exciting that they are going to do that this year. But I don't know how long he's going to be out, but just the fact he's out. I mean, this hasn't been a perfect season by any stretch, but rookie catcher, you're given a lot of rope to the guy. And the next one, Ty, does hurt me as well.
One thing before we move off Moreno, like if you have any chance to acquire him at this deadline, like do it. Like he's not giving the power that he's capable of right now, but he's going to be coming. So just this is probably one of the last. You know, he reminds me of hit tool and just the stature and everything is Giovanni Soto, just kind of a throwback like body shape type hitter. And for those of you that have been around fantasy baseball long enough to remember those days, was a stalwart of a catcher spot. So anyway, sorry, moving on to the next one. I just wanted to put that on the record because I don't think anybody's thinking like that about him yet. I think they kind of post hyped him already. So I think it's relevant in a lot of formats.
Yeah, sounds good to me. Be rid of the 60-day IL and let the project arms enter the organization. Since I wrote that line, Ty, another one has shown up who we will talk to tonight. I can't wait to get your thoughts on it. But right now, Amir Garrett and Thor both entered. Thor started last night, and 5 very good innings of baseball. Definitely was just told, here's what we'd like to see from you. Please go do this thing. And then got into the 6th and clearly, wasn't having it. Gave up a run, was pulled. And then Eli Morgan came in and just blew it up. But 5 1/3 in his debut with Cleveland. This is the best organization you can go to if you're Thor. You want to get an MLB contract next year, similar to the one you just got. The only hope you have is a heck of a stretch run with Cleveland, and he's there now. And with Bieber out, there's still 3 young starters in Cleveland, plus what happened today. So it's interesting. Then Garrett, of course, is a throw-in arm. You don't know what you're going to get, but clearly he's down a step from what he was once upon a time as the gonna be, but then never was legit closer for the Reds. And then since KC this year is where he started, ended there now. Ty, do you have stats on the next guy?
I do not, but I can.
Okay, I'll grab the stats.
I was hoping you knew who he was. I don't even know who he is.
Elika Williams with the Pirates was let me get this right here, first round pick in the 2020 draft. He was a compensation round pick, which, by the way, Ty, I was not aware that with the rule changes last year, one of the things that MLB did when they had the lockout, they agreed that the teams in the AL and NL that win Rookie of the Year both get compensation round draft pick bonuses. So the Mariners had 3 picks in the first round. I was like, why did they have 3? I wasn't sure about the third one. Well, the third one, they called it the Julio pick because he was Rookie of the Year last year.
That explains why everyone was rushing all their prospects up.
Well, I mean, it certainly, when you think about not just the fact that you get, by the time Seattle got on the board, when I was talking to Jerry earlier today, he said, by the time we got on the board, they had the most money available in the draft for the remaining players. So before their first pick, because they had 3 kind of technical first round picks. So they were able to do what they did, which, I mean, we'll save it for an episode, but 3 high schoolers, and they were able to pull them all away from legit college commitments. So, but anyway, Akil Williams, who is just kind of like what's the deal with this guy, rose pretty quick, AA, AAA this year, 12 home runs and 6 stolen bases, batted .268. But the Pirates are calling everybody up right now. So he's just the next guy up. And in 9 at bats, we've got a hit for the kid, 1 walk, but that's all that it is to mention. Just thought I'd throw it out there because I had seen a few people on Twitter talk about this could be a sleeper. I think this is more someone who's just going to be put to sleep on dynasty teams, on your dynasty rosters. And by the end of this season, he'll be a forgotten former first round pick. He might fall under that category of cup of coffee, or as we like to say here, a tea sandwich. And that might be about all we see from him. But got to mention the name.
Yeah, and
This
speaking of
this one
guys that
also
are
sucks, right?
sleeping on fantasy rosters, Aaron Hicks to the AL. This has to be the end of his time in Baltimore. I don't see any way. When you've got Kierstad coming, when that outfield's playing as well as it is already, I just don't see a place for Aaron Hicks moving forward. He did a good job to play center field for the 5 days that they needed him, and now it's time to say goodbye. So I think this might be the end of Aaron Hicks in pro ball. I think he's had enough failure to justify people moving on. We'll see. You never hope for that for somebody, but you certainly got to consider that this is possibly the end for a guy that had a massive contract and lived up to absolutely none of it. So we'll see how that plays out. Chris Bryant hurt again. This is tough for, I think, a lot of people that invested into him going to Coors Field and expecting to see some gains. It's not been that. To say the least. And I mean, that team is also in the very similar position of Pittsburgh, where they're calling people up that can play positions because they've traded a lot of that core as well. It's for me, Robbie, this is exactly what was destined to happen, because this signing in Colorado made no sense to me at the time. Makes less sense now. It
was very much, it was very much under the window of, we got rid of Arenado, big contract, blah, blah, blah. And then, hey, look, we're going to pay not the same, but we're going in upper tiers worth of free agent dollars to this guy. And he came in and he started out hot. And then again, injuries. And it's been 2 years injury riddled for Chris Bryant. And if it wasn't for the fact that Colorado has had a bevy of other players who have been able to come up and kind of replace that position, however, not overall to, make Colorado competitive, it would be a real sore spot. Very much, like why is this one guy getting paid? But they do have a few other guys that are still, Blackman, Grichuk, I guess formerly Grichuk, who are getting paid on the team. It'll be interesting to see what they do next year, because they could have a serious youth movement and by all means have, I think, 6 position players all making under $1 million, like starting position players. And that could be pretty neato for them. San Francisco not finally promoted, but we finally get to see former consensus top 5 fantasy prospect Marco Luciano, who all he did since reaching the highest of heights in 2020 as a prospect has gone in the reverse order. We're not going to comment too much on the stat line. It's pretty early on for Luciano. Whoopsie. Oh my goodness. What am I doing? I'm pressing buttons. Sorry. Not only is my phone going or my computer going on sleep mode, my phone started talking to me. Really wanted me to place a bet on a baseball game. But anyway, we're going to give Luciano some more time to develop. But I mean, he's up and that's exciting. But San Francisco is also doing this weird thing that they always do, which is we're going to bring a prospect up and, maybe we don't have a full-time everyday role for him. And then Gabe Kapler is going to, do what he did to Julio Ramos, which is like, hey, welcome aboard. Sit down, shut up. You're on the bench.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how they play that one out. I don't think he's ready. Right, we talked about this with Torkelson. I think Luciano's in the exact same spot. I think he definitely could have benefited from some more time in AAA. See if it comes back to haunt them. Torkelson's probably a year behind of what he should have been. He's starting to come through now, luckily. But yeah, I think we're looking at a very similar scenario there. It'll be interesting to see. But Seattle, your boys acquired a piece of Toronto just to keep you happy in Trent Thornton. This one makes not a lot of sense because Trent Thornton.
I was just gonna say, yeah. This is just that was kind of like the prerequisite move to like we need arms, very much like St. Louis had done a couple weeks back when they brought Tepera in, only to DFA him now. But I wonder if they could go back in time if they would not do that. But obviously there was an issue where they thought they needed to do it. Utility.
I have a feeling they were prepping just in case they unloaded one of their young arms. Like, I think they were seeing the market for bats. And if they were talking about this on MLB.com today or on MLB TV, sorry, whatever, the MLB channel, whatever, the trade deadline thing. That's what I was trying to say. And how
baseball been very, very good to tie.
Yeah, like if you would have said like Gilbert to the Orioles, like you probably could have pulled away a prospect or two that of real clout. Right? Like that's a trade that Baltimore would have done, right? So if you were Seattle, like if you could have pulled Kauser and I don't know, DL Hull for Gilbert. Do you do that?
No.
Interesting. I think they would.
No,
So
I think Crawford they want long term, so they don't want to. They have so many
Crawford. Sorry,
prospects.
you mean Kauser?
No, like Seattle has Corey Crawford, JP Crawford, who I think they want long term shortstop, and I don't think so. That would get rid of your middle infield idea.
No, Kauser's an outfielder.
Yes, but you also who was the first guy you mentioned with Baltimore?
I said Kauser and DL Hull, pitcher.
Hall.
No,
Oh,
not
D.
Adam
I'm
Hall.
so sorry.
DL Hull.
I'm sorry. I was thinking Adam. Okay. I would still not do that deal because Seattle wants to make sure they have pitchers. They're loaded up with infielders, outfielders. As long as like somebody can wrap Kelnick's arm up every time he strikes out, so he doesn't do something stupid, break his own hand. Then
So flip Kauser for Kobe Mayo. Do you do that deal?
the third baseman, I would be far more interested. Absolutely. Yeah. And the reason being that after this year, I think Suarez is gone. And the experiment of adding a bunch of guys and money was a good temporary one. And as we'll get into with more of these deals here, the Mariners added money that they're now shedding at the end of the year to make sense for themselves moving forward. But I wouldn't want to trade away youth if I'm the Mariners unless I'm getting back like impact level type youth. And they've done deals where they've traded away arms before and gotten back variety, but not young arms like this.
But I think
like
they have enough.
I should say.
But I think they have enough young arms that they could deal from it, right? That's all I'm saying. Is I think that could have been a move to get a centerpiece, right? Like those guys could have happened. It would have been one of two teams. Like unfortunately, you've already played the trades with Seattle, so you're not, or with Cincinnati, so you're not going back to that well.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
You're through there.
So it's pretty much Cincinnati or Baltimore or bust, right? Like that's the only way that I saw that happening. But I do agree with the idea. Like if I was Seattle, I would trade Gilbert all day. Like Gilbert's good. Gilbert's not great. Like that's just the difference. So if you can go and get a great piece to solidify the rest of your offensive core, which you don't really have a good one right now in Seattle, I would do that trade all day.
Well, they could have traded Castillo if they wanted to really try to recoup. Very much like they talked about San Diego possibly wanting to trade Snell. That neither of those happened. One move that
you got Castillo on a really good deal though. I don't think you do that. That deal's really good for an ace.
Well, he's done at the end of this year, so
no,
you had him for a year.
He's got 5. They extended him. He's got 5.
Did they extend Lewis? Okay.
Yep.
Well, that's my mistake there. When Jerry and I were talking earlier, we weren't talking about the details of extensions. We were talking about moves that he had made last year and what he was planning to do.
He's seen you use a spreadsheet, so he didn't want to exchange numbers.
Oh man, a utility starting pitcher, and I call him a utility because he's not like overly valued or anything. I have it written as Tucker Davidson. It's not Tucker Davidson, but Davidson, who was formerly of the Angels, now with Kansas City. It's just like a filler type move that we'll probably see a half a dozen starts because Kansas City starting rotation, not just bad, but also injured. Willie Calhoun DFA'd by the Yankees. That was a few days ago. Ryu back with Toronto. And Toronto, in my opinion, Ty, and I don't want to get too deep into it, but obviously I want to hear from you about this. I believe they're now punting their season with the 6-man rotation. They're getting credit where the credit is not due. And if you talk to Taylor Ward, I don't think he would disagree with me on the fact that Alek Manoah should not be pitching to major league hitters right now.
See, I disagree. I feel that way about Ryu. And I watched Ryu pitch for a little bit this evening. And Ryu's just not like I love Ryu. He's a pitcher. Like I love the way he's more of an artist than a thrower.
A craftsman.
Yeah,
right?
and I don't want to take away from that because I like that more than the throwers we see today. However, I still believe Alek Manoah is the best pitcher in the Jays rotation, and that's going to ruffle people's feathers. But I agree that they're hurting themselves with Ryu, and I also cannot for the life of me understand why you launch him against the Orioles. Like I just don't understand. Let's take a guy that's been off for a year and put his first game back against
division leading upstart team.
Yeah, best record in the AL, like total Baltimore Orioles. I don't understand that move at all. He held his own. I will say that he's not the reason they're getting dusted tonight. He pitched okay.
Yep.
Now he
5 innings pitched, 3 Ks, 1 home run, 1 walk.
He gave up some really loud, really loud contact in the first inning though. Like he got hit hard, and Mountcastle just did what he does in Toronto, which is hit literally everything. If you ever sit Mountcastle while he's in Toronto, you're an idiot. Never, ever, ever sit him when he goes to Toronto. But anyway, I don't like Ryu in that rotation just because I'm more positive Manoa. That's all. I feel like his last start was good. He got a little loose at the end when he hit Ward, but he was very good before that. So I believe Manoa is going to be an important part down the stretch. So I don't think he should be out, but I do not like the 6-man rotation, to put that to bed.
Yeah, I just you're veteran laden, and you're like, hey guys, I got a great idea. Pitch once a week instead of every one of you, or not everyone, but one of you each week is going to get 2 starts. We're going to slow this down when we're trying to roll. Anyway, great way to kill momentum is to change pitchers' routines. But Texas,
I actually think one last thing on the 6-man, because I think the Angels running the same thing. I actually think it hurts the bullpen more than it hurts the rotation, because you lose a man out of the pen and you end up having to shuffle through guys. And so you're ending up in like using options and different things to keep people alive. Right. So like, that's the thing I don't like about it. And it's going to be really interesting to see what they do. Anyway, Texas, Jonah Heim, second half gone for a little bit here.
Yeah, he's out for a couple of weeks. Texas has since, I believe it was Austin Hedges. We'll get down further that they've acquired him. But when I wrote this, Ty, I was thinking, well, there should be a couple catchers. That could be. There's this one guy that I know you like in Texas. Is it finally going to work out? Well, no, turns out, no, they're not. They're just going to go and get Austin Hedges. So damn the thoughts of prospects getting at bats. But I mean, Texas did, load up. They did the load up of load ups. Speaking of a load, Chris Flexen is going to be dumping them in Colorado because he's now going to be pitching in that rotation. And that's unfortunate for everybody who wanted to see good things out of him. I mean, we knew when he came in his first year back from the KBO, that was peak season. We all talked about it. We weren't surprised that there was a bit of regression. The more tape and things they get on him, okay, this is how he's changed. So that was a quick one. But Ty, this was like a fantasy darling that never came to be. Do you recall any hype? And this was not prospect hype. This was, this guy with the Reds, Reaver San Martin, pitcher. It was an offseason guy in rookie redrafts, where you could draft anybody under 50 innings pitched. People are like, this is going to be a guy, right? This could be like an SP3 type guy with the Reds. He has not done that since, I think that was like 2020 season. He's not done that since. Now UCL surgery, 2025. It's most likely when we're going to see him again. So only in your deepest of leagues would you reach for somebody like this if you have room. And at that point, I mean, we're talking about a dart throw. These are tough surgeries to come back from.
Even then, this is a reliever, right? Like you don't throw darts at a reliever in a deep format. So like you got to have a really special view of this player to be able to make that call, in my opinion. I just don't see it as relevant. Next up, we got Kendall Graven back to Houston for my boy Corey Lee, former number 1 prospect in the Houston organization, which doesn't say a whole lot based on the Houston organization's, or prospect list at that time. However, I do love this trade for the White Sox. Like, I think this is a win. I think Corey Lee's a major league catcher, and he's been blocked by a guy that gets out every single time he hits. So, this is an opportunity for Corey Lee to probably get some real time here in the second half. I don't know that they'll rush him up, but we might see him sooner than later.
Yeah, I think he could be the kind of guy who, if we don't see this year, could be an opening day 2024. Look at this guy on our roster, catcher. For Corey Lee. Max Scherzer, this was an exciting one to Texas for Acuna. In fantasy baseball, Ty, I don't think anyone makes this deal. They would all cry foul. You got to give up more than Acuna to get. This is not Ronald. This is, what is it? Is it Yensiel? No, something like that. I get this part wrong.
Starts with an L. It's like lasagna, basically.
Okay, lasagna Acuna. We'll just go with that tonight because, I was drinking before we started recording. I'm drinking now. I'm not concerned with that name. The last one's all that we care about. But in fantasy baseball, 1-for-1, your contract league, whatever, that deal's not happening. Scherzer's worth more in fantasy than he is in real life because his contract hurts. And Ty, I think the only reason this trade happened was that there's insurance when players get hurt, where teams only pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, not tens of millions of dollars. When the player is injured, like DeGrom, they would have taken insurance out on DeGrom getting hurt. So they had money available for a guy like Max. And I'm assuming that with his deal ending at the end of 2024, DeGrom will probably be on the IL until the end of 2024. They're like, it's a wash. We'll just put in Scherzer in place of DeGrom and try to keep our window open, which they are forcing hard with the moves that they have made. And I applaud Texas for doing it. Giving up Acuna when you consistently have been able to produce mid-level MLB outfielders, that's okay. You know, if Acuna is special, good for the Mets. But in the meantime, the Mets are just trying to save money.
Well,
right?
And keep in mind that the Mets also get $36 million in this deal too, right? So like they got
that's the
they
other
got
asset they acquired.
Yeah, they got the Arenado special, you know.
Yeah, they didn't have to move the money; they just don't have to spend it now.
Yeah, like
and Texas also
I still can't believe the Rockies, like the owner wasn't like afraid that Arenado was going to marry his daughter or something like this. Like it just that trade still makes no sense. But yes,
there should be a book written about it at some point in time. It'd be better than any TV show.
Agreed.
Texas wasn't done making moves. They added Jordan Montgomery from St. Louis for an interesting trio that, I mean, we're going to look at the names, say the names now, and then we're going to look at them again at the end of the season to see what Texas actually has here. Left-handed pitcher John King, infielder Thomas Sagas. I'm going to go with that. And right-handed pitcher, oh man, why didn't I give you these? Takoe Roby. Oh, geez,
that's pretty good.
That sounds like a robot.
I was going to say Takeo Roby.
Takeo Roby? Okay.
That's what
I think that you could take a shot on that one.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay, anyway, Jordan Montgomery moves. That's cool. That's hip. That's fun. That's exciting. We want to see Jordan Montgomery sign a big deal somewhere for 6 years and then suck, but get himself paid.
I looked it up because I was just curious.
Yeah, for pronunciation.
Takoe Robbie.
Oh, Takoe Robbie. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, to Shea. Okay.
I like it.
I'm going to give you this one, Ty. I don't want any part of it.
Yeah, Jordan Hicks to the Jays. This, I didn't like the value we gave up for him. It was a need.
Agreed.
Romano hurt, definitely forced his hand. What made me feel a lot better about this trade is when we were done all of our transactions with St. Louis, that it ended up as a very good trade for Toronto, right? Like if you were to look at it from the perspective of Hicks, Cabrera, and DeYoung for basically Roberts, like that's a pretty good trade, right? Like the rest of what we gave up was basically nothing. We gave up a low-level catcher that doesn't have a huge high ceiling. We gave up an A-ball reliever, right? And then we gave up
Kloffenstein?
No, we gave up A-ball. Svanson was the guy that went today for DeYoung.
Oh, okay.
Right, and then Kloffenstein.
Yes, that's right. An older A-ball reliever, yeah.
Yeah, and Roberts is definitely the big piece in that trade. But when you look at him being the only piece to get those three players, really not a bad trade. Because as much as Roberts is probably going to be a major leaguer, I don't see him as a high impact major leaguer. See him as a SP5 high end, if not a middle reliever. So I'm not that upset. Kloffenstein, we were excited about the potential for Kloffenstein. We haven't seen it. We'd mentioned this a couple months ago that he was having a sneaky little season under the radar with no one paying attention. He's building. I still feel very similar to the way about Roberts. Like I just don't think either of these guys are like elite. And I think if you go back in Jay's lower history, like Justin Nicolino is the kind of guy here that got a lot of hype, way more than he should have, was part of that big Miami deal years and years ago, and never ever made it anywhere. And although Roberts has made it further than that, like I said, I do think he's a pro. I do think the rest of this trade is a wash. So I think for why we did this trade, I think it makes sense. What we gave up, I think it makes sense. Overall, I think it's a fine trade when you get to the bottom of it. And Jordan Hicks is definitely the best player we got back. But up until tonight, when Cabrera got absolutely ripped, he's been lights out for the Jays. So I really believe we balanced our bullpen. We got our second lefty. And overall, I just really like the way that this played out.
Yeah, tonight, Jordan Hicks in his Jays debut, 1 inning, 2 earned runs, 3 hits given up, no Ks. Unfortunate, but again, that was already in a game that was blown out. One of the things Toronto did have to do was DFA Mitch White. People were excited about him headed into the season. Ty, you had some dynasty hope for him, nothing overly shiny, but there was the assumption that he could be useful to the Jays. That has been, put out very much like Zach Thompson who also came over from Pittsburgh in the offseason. It was kind of like one of these guys, maybe both could be able to help. Well, Toronto has deemed it unnecessary. And since we've talked about both Toronto trades now, I did want to say the thing that bugs me the most about these deals with Toronto is that they're getting a lot of credit for making moves, but the only thing they did, Ty, was replace injured starters. They didn't actually add to their team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bo gets hurt, they go get another shortstop. Their closer gets hurt, they go get another closer. Cool, you didn't get worse, but you also didn't get better because you don't know how long Romano's going to be out, and then we're kind of waiting on exactly what the real deal is with Bo. But it just kind of bugged me that this is just another one of the deadlines that Toronto made. Their thing used to be controllable assets. We're trying to accumulate controllable assets, but then they cut a guy named Miguel Andujar, who goes off and has 2.5 good years with the Yankees. But they make weird
You're
moves.
thinking Gio Urshela.
Urshela. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. But they make weird moves and they don't commit. And this to me is another instance of a team not committing. And this is another year of Vlad and Bo that gets struck off contractual status. Chapman's gone at the end of this year. There are guys leaving this organization that they'll need to replace. And instead of looking to make impactful trades, like you don't want to trade Ricky Tiedemann, that's your dynamite chip. But why wouldn't you trade him if there's the ability to make, that kind of future player now deal? And I don't know if there's too much in their head, but they seem to trade their prospects in the offseason. But then when it's time to actually really, signify your roster, put your stamp on it, say you're in, they don't do it. And despite the two moves, like I said, they're not moves they made to add to the 26 man. They're moves to make because two guys got hurt and left the 26 man.
So I'm going to disagree a little bit, and I like the way Ross has built the team. I like the way he's gone after guys. I like the trades that we've made. Like we talked about this time last year when we got Merrifield, right? Everyone's like, why would you get that guy? He's old and it's over. And look how good he's been this year, right? It was a great trade, smart trade. We paid nothing for him. Cabrera is a free agent in 26. Like we've got 2 more years of Cabrera after this, right? So that's a great trade for a low level catcher on a guy that has 2 dynamite pitches from the left side. I like that trade all day, every day. So I think that is in a little bit of contrary to what you're saying, but we needed a second lefty in this pen. Cabrera for me is our best lefty. Like Mesa's awesome, but Cabrera with control is better. And it's no knock on Mesa. It's just what Cabrera's ceiling can be.
Just to go out quickly on it, this is the same excitement people had last year with the deal with Miami for Zach Pop.
Yep.
Look at this guy. Look at what he can do. And now what's he doing in the organization other than popping off about airlines and such?
I think they're just fixing his slider, and I think they're also keeping him away from the Anthony Bass stuff because he got looped into that, right? So I think that's part of it. I think they've kept him hidden on purpose.
But it's just to my point of you're not adding several pieces as other teams did. And I'm not saying they have to, but what I'm saying is you've got 2 franchise players in Bo and Vlad who you're supposed to be feeding, who you do in the offseason, right? You feed the egos, you get the other guys. You've done everything you can with the rotation. No negative thing to say about the rotation as far as how they've built it. The problem is how they're going to execute it by saying 6 guys are going to pitch. Make it a 5-man thing, make it a dogfight. Right. And that's the thing that I'm struggling with, because for fantasy purposes, it hurts each and every one of those starters. And in the league that I have Gosman in, where he's very important to me, I do not like the fact that I'm not going to see a 2-start week out of him in September when I'm going to be in my playoffs making a run. Yeah. And that sucks for me. But it also on a larger scale sucks because it's hurting their end lines, and it's going to get them all one less start as the year ends. And I get that you're paying Ryu, as the Blue Jays, you're paying Ryu $20 million this year. So you want to get those starts because each start's going to be worth 10 starts, $2 million a start. You need those 5 innings to help in other areas. But at the same time, it's just the teams that go all in are the ones that I believe in, and the teams that make cautious moves, I'm interested to know what they're really thinking. But I feel like the Jays consistently make moves that are about not taking the next step for the sake of expiring contracts. So even with the 2 they took on, it's just because guys got hurt. That to me, that's the justification. Well, they would not have made these deals if players didn't get injured.
So the other part that you don't know, because you probably didn't see this tonight, Bichette isn't going to be on the shelf for that long. So it was a patellar sprain, tendon sprain, which if you're to ever hurt anything in your knee, the patellar tendon, as long as it's not very severe, is one of the better ones. There's no good one to hurt in the knee for the record, but it's one of the better ones that you can hurt. So it's inflammation. There's no real major structural damage, right? So it sounds like a minor sprain. He's probably going to end up on the IL, but it is minor from the sounds of it. So I think that played into this, because what you can do is you're going to have DeYoung to play second base when Bo's back. You're going to have Merrifield in left field, and you're going to solve the black hole that's been Dalton Varsho in that lineup. So, like, I think there's a move there. The second part to that I do like about this trade, and compliments, I always dump on my brother, but he actually made me aware of this because I didn't know either. But Paul DeYoung has 2 options. So he has 2 more years that they could potentially pick up at 12 and 15, which isn't ideal in terms of money. However, if you're not going to re-sign Witt, which I think you're going to have a pretty good idea at the end of the season what he's going to get, I think you can pay Witt 15 a year, and I would rather do that. And I think that's what they'll try to do. However, if he does leave, that's a really good acquisition that costs you absolutely nothing to give you that safety net while you wait for Orvelis and Barger. And guess what? You don't have to make that decision for both of those years. Like Paul DeYoung is at $12 million, a defensive guy that can play second base and give you flexibility to replace Merrifield for next year. I like that trade a lot. So this is what I'm saying. Like, I like the way Ross sets us up because he makes some of those smart moves. And guess what? If you're able to retain Merrifield, he's your left fielder. And now you've got your infield set, you've got your outfield set, and you also have the possibility of losing Chapman on top of that. So I like the move here because there's not a lot of bats in free agency. So, like, Chapman's going to get paid way more than he should, and Toronto's not going to do it. So the Young gives you a little bit of safety so you don't have to put Barger and Orvelis Martinez into the lineup next year.
Okay, well, that was enough Jays talk. Let's get to something super exciting. Utility infielder Nicky Lopez traded to Atlanta for pitcher Ryan O'Hearn next. The Angels acquired Grichuk and CJ Cron from Colorado for Jake Madden and, unfortunately, left-handed pitching prospect Mason Albright. And it's really too bad for Albright because in 2021, he was signed, I think it was 12th round pick. He was way over slot, and a few of the, smart fantasy people out there were like, what's the deal with this guy? I looked into it a bit. Oh, he was an academy guy. He's a really good pitcher. He was supposed to go to college, and the Angels were able to free up the cash to convince him to sign. And now he's going to go out there and live a slow death in Colorado. What's the ceiling on the best pitching prospect in a decade we've seen in Colorado? German Marquez, we had SP2 ceiling on, which he never achieved. And now he's not even pitching, injuries, of course, not performance, but, and then Freeland. Yep. So that's your upside.
Don't forget Jimenez. He was pretty good,
but he was 1 year and he was traded in, and that could have been, was that a decade ago? Yeah, maybe. Whatever. Colorado had,
still running 21 miles a day or whatever he runs.
But anyway, it was just unfortunate. And for those who were sleeper or who were there early and made the Mason Albright pick, and then other people like me came along and were like, "Oh, I thought he'd go later in the draft. Any interest?" And you said no. Well, that's why you deal prospects, people, because you never know when they're pitchers and going to get traded to Colorado. Anyway, Ty, do you want the next one? It's fun. It's fun.
Verlander and a pile of money to Atlanta or to Houston. Sorry, this is a weird one for me. Like, it's just not what I would have targeted if I was the Mets, right? Like, no knock on Drew Gilbert, and Ryan Clifford definitely is a rising prospect on almost pretty much every list. But I definitely, like, there's no way I make this trade without one of Pedro Leon or Luis Baez. Like, I just don't do this trade with those guys. Like, I don't necessarily have a problem with either of these guys, but I find it very odd that the Mets didn't target the other guys. They need outfielders, right? Like, that's a reality for the Mets. They don't need infielders, also a reality. However, if you were to collect a lot of really good infielders, you could maybe get rid of that Lindor contract, right? Like, that's the way that I would have positioned myself. Because if you're gonna, take this step the way you have this year, like, you got to get rid of Lindor, and you got to think about maybe even getting rid of Alonso, right? Like, that's the reality of what you are as a Mets team right now. So I just find this return not bad, just weird. So that's my read on this one.
Yeah, I mean the Mets are sending 35 million to the Astros for this year and next year as far as covering salary. And if Verlander, I think it's if he pitches 140 innings next year, the conditions on conditions, right? Then the Mets are also on the hook for 17.5 million of Verlander's 2025 option that will vest at that point. Like, man, that is expensive for a couple prospects. And what you're trying to do out of this, I guess, is do a major reset. But you just acquired this offseason 4 supposedly legit starting pitchers. 2 of them are aces, Scherzer and Verlander, who are now gone. One of them got hurt in spring training, unfortunately, who had an excellent spring training and 2022 in Quintana. And then you picked up, the best pitcher from KBO in Sanga. Well, the only 2 guys left, Quintana's made 2 starts as a Met so far through injury. Not his fault, of course, but your season hasn't gone the way you wanted, but you're punting with so many games to go and giving up so much money to only get back. And it doesn't sound right to say only get back when it's 2 good prospects, but to only get back 2 prospects with the amount of money you're spending, why not just keep Verlander? Like, what are you going to lose? You could still get a deal where you just don't have to spend the money, but instead you're shipping the money, which means it's against your cap. So that just means they're not going to be spending this money this offseason. And for Houston, it's just like unfair for them to get it back. Yes, Gilbert was their first round pick last year, but he signed for, I think, under $5 million. And you're getting back like possibly $40 million over the next 3 years in savings off of Verlander's contract. That's a heck of a deal to make if you are drafting your first round player and turning him into the return of your Hall of Fame pitcher. In Verlander, who hasn't been Hall of Fame worthy, but hasn't sucked.
Yeah, like Houston's rotation needed some stability. Like this makes sense for both teams. Like I don't see this as a bad trade. I just think it's the wrong way to approach it. Like, and this is like if we look back on Epler and his time in the Angels, like, this is a scenario where he did a poor job of building that roster too, right? So to go get 2 outfielders that aren't the 2 best guys you can get in this trade when you're paying all this money to give away a Hall of Famer. I don't know. I don't love it. Like I said, I would have got Baez or Pedro Leon, and I don't do a deal without one of those guys in it.
Well, they also
go ahead.
Like Houston also has 7 starters now. Like they sent whatever it was, like B Black, whatever his name is. I apologize for not getting his right because I actually like him and I have him in a few dynasty leagues. But Framber Valdez, Jose Urquidy is now back. Obviously, McCullers is hurt. Christian Javier, Hunter Brown. You've been using JP France. You're now adding Verlander to the mix. And then, like I said, you sent down, I'm going to try to find the name. Just pronounce it properly. The man just deserves really quick, it. But anyway, 7th SP.
The way they're all pitching right now, JP France might be SP3 on that team. Like, that's just where they're at. Like, Javier might be SP4 at this point, right? I think he'll bounce back. But, like, right now, France has kind of earned that spot. Like, Bielak going down, I think, makes a ton of sense. His stuff is okay at best. He's a great SP5 spot starter. Not a guy you want to
playoff guy
every time.
Yep.
Yeah. But I mean, Urquidy we've seen be successful out of the pen, and I think that's the way they'll use him. And then Blanco is a guy that I think can flourish a little bit here. So I don't hate it. Hunter Brown's obviously going to be in there. So like if that's your 5 in your worst case scenarios that you have extra Blanco and Urquidy, cool. That's a good problem to have.
It just screams Houston guys long term though. That's what bugs me about it. Like all of the guys we're talking about at the back end of that rotation, Verlander's presence is 2 to 3 years beyond this year, or sorry, 2 years beyond this year, and that's
but Urquidy hasn't been able to stay in that rotation his entire career, right? Like I mean, so as much as you want to say that, like you have a team that's ready to win a championship again, and you can't rely on a guy like Urquidy to stay healthy. You also can't count on a guy like Hunter Brown to stay hot all the way through the end of the season as a young guy that's getting his innings built up still, right? So. Like when you start to think about those things, like there's a very real scenario here that Houston's just thinking logically, like, we are going to run out of some capacity here, and this trade helps us. So I don't have a problem with it, Robbie. You can never have too much pitching down the stretch. That's just a reality. Toronto, Houston both have enough, almost too much, but I'm sure they'll work through it. And in both cases, they need to hit to win. Pitching's not going to matter for either of those teams. They're just going to be in it. and whether they hit or not will determine how they finish. But we've talked about that. We talked about the return for the Mets heading to the Orioles, who made a nice splash and did it in a very efficient way, if you ask me, acquiring Jack Flaherty from the Cardinals to finish off their fire sale. They gave up Cesar Prado, Drew Rom, and Zach Showalter, which is an okay return. And I think just Jack Flaherty doesn't deserve a whole lot more based on how he's pitched up till
Right.
now.
And
But
he's
now
leaving.
but now he has the defense of the Great Wall. So maybe that will help him give up less taters. We'll see. But I like this trade for the Orioles. It's not a huge risk. They didn't give up a lot of super high end stuff here, and they got a guy that could be really impactful for them down the stretch.
Yeah, Prado is a decent prospect, 868 OPS, 27 strikeouts, 85 games in AA and AAA. Rom, 534 ERA, 100 strikeouts and 86 innings at AAA. Ignored the ERA. That's one of those, the guys working on stuff. And then Showalter's interesting. The other thing Baltimore did do, which they did before this trade, was they sent down my boy Tyler Wells to get him right, because 3 starts after the All-Star break, something's off with him. And they're gonna get it right, and he's gonna be one of those guys down the stretch that comes back. But Flaherty, more to the point, is going to be the guy they're hoping shows up and just like has a run right now with Baltimore. This was the big acquisition for them, and I hope it works out. They spanked the Jays tonight, and they're probably going to do it the next couple days too. I don't know if we're going to see Flaherty in this spell here, like where he would be in his own rotation, but that's an interesting one. We're going to circle back to the DeJong trade if we need to, Ty, or we can continue to move on. You did talk about the fact he's got the club options. And then, like you said, it was a 13th round pick in 2021, Swanson, to the Cards, 24-year-old, 1.11 ERA, 39 Ks over 32 and a third innings. However, he's in high A. That's not what you want from a 24-year-old. You'd like to see that at AAA. That would garner some interest. Tigers traded an all-star. They traded an all-star today, tied to the Phillies. Michael Lorenzen, the $8 million man. And they got back a kind of intriguing fantasy prospect, infielder Hao-Yu Lee. Lee, number 5 prospect with Phillies, 283 since he's been promoted to AAA. He's supposed to be a hit first type guy, but again, second baseman, not a ton of power. However, for fantasy purposes, you got to fill out all the positions. So he's, to me, interesting. I like this trade for Detroit. They got a player back that could see MLB time in the next 18 months.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it either. Giving up Lorenzen was always the plan. Like, they didn't sign Lorenzen to do anything but this. They clearly had a guy that they wanted. They want him for a reason. So that's always a good sign when it comes to this. The one thing I will say about this trade deadline, there was a lot more like one-for-one trades that were somewhat lopsided, right? Like, as much as I don't think Lorenzen is a star, I think he's been overhyped for several years because guess what? He swung a bat a couple times. But I think in this scenario here, like, we're seeing a trade for a major leaguer that clearly has more value than current Hao-Yu Lee, right? So it's interesting. Like the trade that a couple of the trades that the Jays made with the Cardinals would fit that category, and we've seen a couple other throughout the deadline. But I like it. It's a sign of trade value starting to shift again. The only thing I will say is that the trade values of hitters is still very, very high, which is a really interesting scenario. So next on the list, the Padres added to their bullpen, as they call it. Scott Barlow headed out there for Henry Williams. Padres, this, adding a little bit of depth for them is good. They needed to just fill in a couple gaps in that pen. Barlow certainly could do that for them. He's had a down year, 5.35 ERA. Not great for a guy that was, pretty electric over the last couple years. But he is 13 for 16 in the saves, and has been, kind of bad in his last couple outings here, last 16 outings, 22 hits, 11 walks, 14 earned runs across 15 and 2/3 innings for an 8.04 ERA, which you do not love to see. But he can pitch. Like, we know this, and it could be a scenario where he goes to work knowing his team sucks, and he's not at all motivated to lock it down because it does nothing for their team for him to be good, right? Like, it absolutely actually hurts their future by improving their reducing their potential upside of draft picks by winning games. So, they're not in
time. He watched Chapman come in and go out. Amir Garrett came in, he was out.
Yeah, but
Hard
he
to stay
fought first,
motivated if your friends.
fought, and then he left.
Well, it's hard to stay motivated if maybe some of your friends are leaving, or the more talented guys, which I think that's safe to say. At one time, at least, they were more talented. For Barlow to keep chugging along, but either way, yeah, it's a minor move. This was maybe the most interesting move all day. Maybe it's going to be up for debate.
This one's
The
my
next
favorite
one,
of the day.
yeah, the Marlins acquire. I'm going to call him a frustrating fantasy player, Josh Bell, who I thought was going to have a monster year this year. For Gene Segura, who was previously DFA'd, and this is the big one. Former first-round pick Khalil Watson. So Bell, 701 OPS, 11 home runs in 97 games, and he's had a little bit of a power blip. I think 3 dingers the last 2 weeks. But Bell's moving again. Last year, he was really good in Washington, got moved to the Padres, and fell off a cliff. And I don't know what to say about that. But on the other side of this, Segura is under contract next year. I have no idea if there's money involved in this because they traded him. So Segura's money, like his contract moves, it's not like he was cleared and the Marlins owe all the money. There's money with it, which I think is why Watson went in this deal. Maybe that's how they got it done. But he was the 16th overall pick in 2021, 727 OPS, 9 dingers, 14 stolen bases this year. And again, we're lower levels with the Marlins. This is a high school drafted guy. And he's on the slow burn right now because he was somebody who was like a breakout fantasy type guy. And then as soon as he got his first full season in pro ball, we were trying to tell everybody to pump the brakes a year ago. Don't go, thinking Khalil Watson's career is over because he's got a high strikeout rate. We were listening to other, fantasy analysts who were selling him away. Slow burn on this guy. Not everybody needs to be Jared Kelenic and rush up because we've seen what's happened with Jared Kelenic. You can have a slow burn. Khalil Watson's a slow burn. Now he's in an organization that promotes their prospects, especially their infield ones. Their entire infield is now going to be full of them. So it's a credit to Cleveland to get another one that I think they can work with, and hopefully we'll see some positives from it. But Bell to Miami, I think, really sucks because it's a bigger park. I don't know. It's a better team, I guess. Maybe that's the deal.
He's not really a better team. But he's not a home run guy, right? Like he's a get on base guy, and every now and then the ball goes out. But I think this is an interesting move for Miami, who made it very clear in the offseason their move was going to be acquire contact bats. And Bell certainly fits that mold, although he's made less of it this year than what we've seen in previous years. I don't mind this move for Miami. It brings in a veteran that's been around, a switch hitter that can give them some unique looks, right? So, like, I like it for their roster flexibility. It adds another veteran, which they need. On the Cleveland side, the Segura, I think, was a throw-in. I think it was a, hey, do you want this guy? And they're like, sweet. Yeah, we'll take a guy that can be an old guy on our young guy team.
I feel like he's the reason it was Watson.
I do too.
That's what I'm thinking.
Well, I think it was always Watson, and I think it might have been a show of good faith
what
of
gets
like,
it done.
Or no, I think it might have been like Khalil for Bell, and like, hey, do you want Segura too? Like, we kind of feel bad for the guy, like, and we don't want him to hang around anymore. Will you take him too? And Cleveland's like, sure, why not? Like, we don't have anyone that's over the age of 24 on our team anymore, so let's.
Our oldest player is Jose Ramirez.
Yeah, so we'll take this guy, and maybe Segura and Ramirez are friends too. You never know those things behind the scenes. But anyway, for me, the best part of this trade is like Khalil Watson. The big knock on him was personality or arrogance or whatever personality flair that stopped him from being the first overall guy, because that's what he was supposed to be, right? And he never became that guy. There's clear abrasion in this organization for the Marlins. Good for him getting out of there. Good for Miami for getting rid of him, and probably really good for Cleveland because they're very good at developing these sort of guys. So Robbie, I'm gonna get ahead of us a little bit, and I'm just gonna toss him right in.
Hello. Is it me you're looking for?
It's bold. Team post hype.
21-year-old into team post hype already. But I really think that's how people have moved off of Watson. And you mentioned it, the slow burn conversation. That's why this is my favorite trade of today, because Khalil Watson's value just hit the bottom and bounced. And we're gonna go the other way from here. And I love this trade for Cleveland. I think this was a very good one. They got out from Bell. And I think they made a really strong acquisition for their organization.
Yeah. All right. Padres acquire Rich Hill, baby. He's still out there. And first baseman J-Man Choi from the Pirates. In return, the Pirates get legit prospect Jackson Wolf, contactee first baseman guy. I don't know what they're going to do. Alfonso Rivas, who's old, and then outfielder Astur Suaro. Nailed it. So 43 is the age of Hill, and he's been fine. And this is just another player that they started to add. So it's more interesting. Choi, we know, is good. We talked about the idea of like good as far as like fantasy guy that you could take a shot on. Since he's been back from injury, he's in a platoon situation, 930 OPS, 4 dingers. Cool. But here's a fun one. 6'7" foot Wolf, going from the Padres to the Pirates. He was the 16th prospect. He's got a slider, curveball, good fastball, but not high velo. 92 is the max out. He just got promoted to Double A.
6'7" and only throw 90. Like, how's
Well,
that?
I said Double A. He just got made his MLB debut on the 22nd. But prior to that, he was in Double A all year with San Antonio. So I don't know what Pittsburgh's going to do. But the thing that puts fear into my my heart about this with Wolf is that the Pirates have not done good things with pitchers. It's taken years. We talked about it on a recent podcast with Mitch Keller, and Rosemary Contreras is the current case of that. But Contreras was a guy that came over in the tie-on deal when it was a 4-for-1 or something like that. And he's the one who all of a sudden was anointed like, oh, no one knew about him, but he's now a legit guy. Maybe he never was. Maybe he never should have been. Maybe he was just a really young guy that was succeeding early. We'll have to see with Wolf. But I was just going to say, Ty, to your point, the fact that Wolf is not dominating with that frame might mean the Pirates are like, we're going to get you into the velo camp this season, and you and Skeens are going to hang out, and we're going to see what we can get from this.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree. I think that's a very reasonable outcome on that one, to be honest. Like, the only thing for me is, like, if you're 6'7" and you do this for a profession, like, how do you not use that catapult of a limb to just be able to sling it? Like, I just don't, that doesn't even make sense to me.
Just because he's so big, if he comes down like right across, he could confuse hitters because it's coming so slow. Like they're expecting another 8-10 miles on it, and he's not providing it. So his off speed would play really big because they're just afraid of the body, right?
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yep. And just to put the bet on Rosemary Contreras, his ERA is not getting better by the day. So yeah, that needs to be fixed. I've said this before. There was more bottom, right? So just on Contreras, remember, it'll come back. Next up on the list, Tommy Pham headed to the D-backs for infielder Jamie Rodriguez. Pham is, I was having this debate earlier with someone. Pham is one of the more underrated baseball players in baseball. Like, he's never going to woo you with like eliteness, but he's definitely a guy that helps teams win. And has been one of the better Mets over the last several weeks. He's on a good deal. He can play left field and DH, and adds a little bit of veteran presence to that D-back outfield, which it needs. And the right-handed bat is also welcome because they got way too many lefties in that outfield as well. So gives them some good balance. I like it. 268, 348, 472 over the last 79 games. Nothing to hate about that. Not as you added in the comments, Robbie, not his first trade. He's been involved in several, bounced around. Going back the other way, Rodriguez, he's just 17, 250, 368, 751, with 2 bombs, 18 ribbies, and 12 stolen bases. So a long ways away, still a prospect that it has some developing to do. But again, for Tommy Pham, a bit of a lottery ticket. That makes sense. But again, one of those 1-for-1 trades again that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, the Yankees really disappointed their fan base tonight, and only acquired relief pitcher Kenyon Middleton from the White Sox for Juan Carlia. Middleton's 29. He's not going to, best case scenario here, he picks up safe hold situations. They've done this before. Clay Holmes was a guy, but Middleton, I don't think, is going to be that guy. We'll see. We'll see how it plays out. But
Middleton's a nice reliever, though. Like, he's definitely not going to hurt the Yankees. Like, that's a nice piece.
I'm not excited by this one. That's what we want to see on trade deadline day. Opportunities open up, like what eventually happened, and I was fortunate enough to call it out on Clay Holmes and have him in several dynasty leagues. But anyway, Carly is another guy in the Yankees organization lost. He's been there since 2019. He's only 21. He's at high A. There's no such thing as prospect fatigue on a guy who no one has looked at. But this is the curious case of a trade like this to the White Sox. He's 2-4 record at what was it, A ball? Yeah, high A, sorry. But the K to 9, 11.8. So there's something there. And the ERA sub 4, 3.67. So now we're going to watch him. But prior to the trade, he was just hanging out in the organization. So I'm interested to see what goes on moving forward with this one, but I don't have super high hopes. The other fun Miami trade tie was the Marlins getting some burgers from the White Sox for left-handed pitcher Jake Eder, who was part of the 2020 draft class. Berger has control up to 2028, which is why this is a very interesting deal. He's a power bat. He's 27 years old, 25 dingers this year. And that's your power guy there. Now, average 214, and the OBP sucks, 279. So this is contrary to the Marlin way, which I guess you can do that if you have a Jorge Soler that you're going to play off of him. Maybe there's like a super platoon and or late game pinch hitter situation coming up here. But I like this for Berger, who was basically dynasty fodder a year and a half ago. No one really cared much about him, but no one would get rid of him or cut him off the roster because there was a shot, right? There was a shot. Now he's going to be a Marlin.
I think it's a really interesting move when you look at, the rest of what that team has. Like you've got Garrett Cooper, you have the shell of Yuli Gurriel, you have
no Cooper's gone. Cooper was traded today.
What?
Yeah, we'll get to it.
There
were a lot of deals today, man. Oh my God, there were a lot of deals.
Okay, I definitely missed that one. I don't dislike the move for Berger. I was just gonna really quickly pull his splits and see what his lefty righty splits were. I mean, this for me doesn't necessarily give you a huge value defensively, obviously, but he is okay against the lefties. His OPS against lefties 939, Robbie. So 757 against righties, which is serviceable, not great. But the 939 against the lefties is definitely interesting. So I don't hate that one. You toss in Josh Bell against the righties. That's not a bad little pickup there.
Yeah, and then Eder going the other way in the trade to the White Sox is an ideal return. Tommy John's season is currently in the return from Tommy John. That season is currently happening right now. The K per 9 is the shining example here. Is 4.12 ERA. Who cares? But 11 Ks per 9 over the 9 starts he's been back so far. So if he gets another 9-10 starts rest of season, he'll be ready to go kind of normal. But Eder was not previously seen as an exciting prospect. He was just kind of by default moving up the list within Miami because Yuri Perez is now off that prospect list. He's eclipsed 50 innings this year. I think he's at 51 and a third. And again, like he's the real guy, excuse me, that Miami should have been acquiring today by putting him back on the roster, but they're very concerned about his inning count for this year, which is going to put them in a bad spot with him next year, which, I mean, I don't want to get into this, but we've seen it with Aaron Sanchez here in Toronto. It is a risky thing to do. If the guy's healthy, maybe don't screw with him too much. Let him pitch. Obviously, we understand arm fatigue, but that's where you shut him down and have a light throwing program in the offseason. We're not medical scientist doctor people, but we do understand when things happen over and over again that there are patterns when you screw with pitchers, especially in season. It can result in some really crappy injuries. Brewers acquired a crappy pitcher, but whatever. Left-handed Andrew Chafin leaves the Diamondbacks because they've picked up other guys and they traded away right-handed pitcher Peter Strzelecki. Boom. Strzelecki, 28-year-old righty.
Yeah, This one's weird for me, Robbie, just because like Chafin's obviously a free agent after this year, and in this, alphabet soup guy is in a free agent until 2029. So like you've got an arm side switch here because they're very similar numbers, right versus left, except one guy has 1 year and one guy has a bundle. So obviously the Brewers, like what I will say before we get into it, the Brewers obviously know what they're doing with pitching, right? That's one thing they're good at. So they obviously know something here. In terms of
Chafin does have an option tie for next year, but it's pretty steep for him. 7.25. It's in the notes.
I didn't read the notes. I don't read your notes.
I put it in the notes. When my boss came in today and was talking to me about work and stuff. And then he's like, hey, we got tickets to go to a Blue Jay versus Guardians game at the end of August. And I'm like, I'm in. So I'm going to this game on, I think, August 28th. Anyway, I told him how important today was to me in my life because it's the trade deadline day.
Yeah.
And he was a little taken back. And then I told him about dingers and everything else. And I verbal diarrheaed him about baseball for a good 5 minutes before I realized he didn't mean to start the conversation we're now in. So I recoiled back and I told him about, the deadline deals and how I couldn't wait until I went home to really look into it. Meanwhile, I'd spent the bulk of my day sorting out each and every deal and making notes. Okay.
So just in case he's listening, like,
yeah, sorry,
don't
Javier.
worry, he still made the food. We're good.
Absolutely. The functions went off perfectly. We did an indigenous drop and go meal with what we have as our indigenous taco. Delicious. We also did fish platters, including using sturgeon, not sturgeon caviar, it was sturgeon sides, $90 a kilogram. Jeez. Meow, that is expensive. Anyway, Ty, so did you do a little bit of work here on the rest of this? Yeah.
Just before we move off of this trade with the relievers, I don't know that there's ever been a person ever that is better suited to be a professional athlete in the state of Wisconsin than Andrew Chafin. Let's just say that out loud. Yeah,
like I mean, the sash of the body.
He's never gonna have to buy a beer ever. Like,
and he absolutely 100% rides a motorcycle with no helmet.
He might not even wear pants. Like, like we just
or he just wears his baseball pants.
Yeah,
like he wears his game pants.
Wears a police hat and that's it. Like he just just rocks it. Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting one. There is the 2 years, like you said, you were correct. For the 7 that the other guy gets. So it's an interesting trade. We'll see how this one plays out. I do like what Arizona's front office has been doing in the trade market over the last couple of years. Like Hazen's done a great job out there. And I think this is another example of one that I'm intrigued by because it's starting to be like very much like we've talked about Tampa Bay. When they trade for somebody, I'm paying more attention now because he's done a good job out there. So that's why my radar's up a little bit. Because if Milwaukee's giving up on a guy, that says like one thing, but then I'm also starting to trust Arizona. So it's like I'm torn as that. So it's just one that I got my popcorn out for, more or less.
Yeah, we already touched on Austin Hayes going Austin Hedges going from the Pirates to the Rangers, international pool money. That's one of the fun things, Ty. One of the few things they're allowed to trade for. I also learned that teams can trade competitive balance picks. So if you have a free agent that signs, that was yours, that didn't take the qualifying offer, signs elsewhere, you can trade that pick. DePoto and I, again, talking about this, all those funny things that he taught me.
I'm just really frustrated that Austin Hedges got 2 mentions in this podcast.
Yeah, it doesn't deserve it. He's, but again, if anything, this is just because Sam Huff is getting screwed for all of the people like yourself, Ty, who have him in dynasty leagues. Sam Huff is going to have to find a new way. He is, oh man, who are the catchers who just didn't amount to anything that were supposed to be big bat guys? Zach Collins, whatever, you name them. Sam Huff is sadly falling into that category, and it seems like Texas is fine with it. But again, Bubba Thompson's been buried with Texas. All these crappy things have happened with Texas for fantasy guys because of players like Austin Hedges and the need for the MLB team to punt the catcher position or punt this outfield, whatever, just because they want this. Now, the Padres side did say they acquired Garrett Cooper earlier. That was for right-handed pitcher Sean Reynolds from the Marlins and left-handed pitcher Ryan Weathers. Weathers we know because we thought there was something there with him, and maybe with Miami there will be. But Reynolds is a number 21 ranked prospect through the fun folks at MLB Pipeline. 277 ERA, 54 strikeouts in 48 2/3 innings in both AA and AAA. That's interesting. But Miami doesn't have a great record with these guys, so I don't know what to say about this deal. Like, it's just kind of interesting that Cooper left. I think that's my takeaway.
I like Weathers as a really solid bullpen arm for them, though. Like, I think a good middle reliever. Mm-hmm. He throws hard enough that he can be valuable out of the pen. But going the other way, putting this all together because I didn't understand the G-Man Choi trade, but now I do. Like, paired with
they just built a platoon.
And Garrett. Oh, the Garrett Cooper G-Man Choi is like duplicating Juan Soto. Like, like that's not even. I say that like facetiously, but I like
Right.
at the same time,
That's the plan.
like it's legitimate. Like Garrett Cooper, like off the top of your head, what do you think his left-handed numbers are? Just versus the lefties.
I'll just pretend that they're high, and I'll say he's batting 285.
He's batting 349.
Okay.
And
Wow,
his
he
OPS
sucks against righties.
Yes, he does. Yeah, not that bad. 230, 682, but for sure splits. And the slugging 485 and 871 OPS, right? So not huge power numbers, but again, when you put him and you put G-Man Choi in there, like what's not to love about this trade, right? Like I'm gonna pull the left-handed numbers here or the right-handed numbers for Choi because we all know they're good. That's not new. But again, they're down for Choi versus his regular. So I'm going to just tell you his 2023 and then we'll reference 2022 because he's coming off an injury. So 224 and a 789 OPS versus the righties, which is still pretty good. But if you go back a year, actually, I'm going to do career because that'll give us a better split.
Sure. I'll very quickly just say on Weathers, Ty. Weathers this year, although like the prospect pedigree is a little higher, former first round pick in 18, he has sucked this year. 6.25 ERA, 161 WHIP, and 29 strikeouts in 44 and 2/3 innings, which would be the big question mark with him. But again, this could be something that Miami's like, we can sort this out. You take a 4-pitch guy, you make him a 2-pitch guy. We've seen it before, right? Like brief periods of success with some of these guys. Maybe that's the play with him. But anyway, please super utility platoon us with the Padres here.
Yeah, and Choi's career numbers, and this is career, including some of his early years where he wasn't nearly as good. 810 OPS, right, versus the righties. So again, combined, like you're an 840, 850 OPS as a combined player, which again, like I said, is in you're in the ballpark of those elite guys. Like again, you added a star.
You just be a first base all-star, but it's two players. Yeah. Until they start to go lefty righty, and then you have to start it. But either way, it doesn't matter. I like what you just did there with it. It's a good baseball move for fantasy owners, like like us, like the guys who care. It sucks rest of season, but I think this probably affects like the Cronenworth type player.
That's where I was going to go
the most.
But it also gives you
taking a step back.
But it also gives you another platoon potentially with Cronenworth and maybe your boy Ha-Seong Lee or Ha-Seong whatever is it, Kim. Sorry,
Ha-Seong Kim, and this is shocking to me. Second best shortstop the last 30 days. Yesterday
playing second base.
Second best short. Yes, sure, but shortstop eligible across the board this year, Ty. Second best. And I was checking because I recently acquired Tim Anderson in our big money auction league, and I gave up Kyle Hurt, who is a K machine, but he's doing it at AA, and he's 24. So I'm not, he and Sheehan with the Dodgers were both at the same level this year. I thought Hurt was going to be the one that got pushed. I was really excited. It was Sheehan, and because it was him, I was a little hurt about Hurt, and I was willing to deal him, and I got Tim Anderson and Colorado relief pitcher for rest of season. But I wanted to know what Anderson was doing the last month, and he finally hit his first home run the day I accepted the trade, and he's been the 20th best shortstop. But Kim, again, on point, second best.
And so probably the most important trade of the deadline is up next here, Robbie.
The Braves acquired Brad Hand from the Rockies for Alec Barger.
Yeah.
Barger, Braves 17th round pick in 2019, is a relief pitcher in waiting. 30 appearances this year at AA, a 3.29 ERA. That's pretty crappy when that's my note on the guy. But Brad Hand just not dead. But we have seen Brad Hand traded at the deadline before and being so bad he was DFA'd. We saw that happen here in Toronto. So hopefully that this goes well. It wasn't Anthopoulos that acquired him before, but he just did now. So we'll see. That's the second trade between the Braves and the Rockies this year, which is an interesting thing to think about come the offseason. Just for the sake of, you talk right now about, lay the groundwork for bigger deals in the offseason. Sometimes, teams find trade partners for a few things here. This was an interesting one for me. The Mets actually acquired players. They acquired Adam Kolarek, who had brief periods of success as a relief pitcher the past few years, but then went to Oakland and sucked, ended up back with the Dodgers. So the Mets got him, as well as Phil Bickford, former first round pick on a previous podcast years ago, Ty. We talked about Bickford and how he was Not was he drafted by the Jays and not signed and blah blah blah, a whole thing. There was a thing we went through. But anyway, he's traded now to the Mets because they need a few arms, I'm guessing. And this is just for cash. So the Mets, got whatever, maybe 250,000. Maybe they got Coke for the next 2 years.
We just need to figure out what we can trade the Mets, and we can get ourselves some cash. Like, what can we? Maybe it will be how to build a roster. Maybe that's what we can give them.
We'll give them a Word doc that I'll build, and we'll get cash in exchange. The Dodgers also acquired Ryan Yarbrough from the Royals. We knew this was another one, right? They signed him, I think 1 year, $4 million was the Yarbrough deal. Maybe it was less than that. They got back for their trouble first base prospect Devin Mann and shortstop Derling Figueroa. Mann hitting 307, 89 games at AAA, which is fun, sneaky. Figueroa, 19 years old, hitting 237 in complex league with a couple of home runs, which is more important than the 237 because he's making contact.
Didn't Figueroa come over in the Mitch White trade?
I don't know offhand.
I feel like he did.
Yeah, Devin Mann, who I think was 1% owned in Fantrax. I feel like he's going to be somebody because he's at AAA and he's hitting over 300. He's going to start to get drafted. Unfortunately, for me, this trade is going to make him more relevant. However, the fact that he's leaving LA, where they could use a potential future first baseman, and going to the Royals, where they certainly don't need one because they have two, hurts him overall. I'm not sure his age on that one. I didn't get that written down when I was at work today making my notes for fantasy baseball. If you are doing a little bit of work on that trade, Ty, I'm going to very quickly mention one that's not important, and that's that the Red Sox got Luis Urias, who was having a terrible season with the Brewers, in exchange for Bradley Blaylock. Boston got a guy who's just been bad since coming back from injury, 145, 299, 236 line. And then he went down over a month ago to AAA. Blaylock with the Red Sox, drafted 32nd round in 2019. I can't believe we're talking about this, but here's the reason why. 11 starts in A-ball, 2.19 ERA, and a 1.01 whip. So that might be the one thing that's interesting from this. Urias clearly has years of control ahead of him and options since he was sent down. So the Red Sox are willing to take a chance. And still, Ty, we're still waiting on the Alberto Mondesi debut with the Red Sox, and he has not even been on a rehab assignment. So that's why a trade like that makes sense for the Red Sox, because they are throwing everything they can at the wall for middle infield help.
I mean, this is a sneaky trade. Like, again, they gave up very little to get a what could be, not guaranteed, an impact bat in their lineup. Like, this is a guy that
Blaylock probably has been paid $10,000 since he's been drafted by the Red Sox in 2019, including a signing bonus. Like this, they had nothing invested in this guy.
Well, and the Brewers have like 40 infielders, so they don't need Luis Urias, right? Like, so this is like, they also don't need good pitching because they have lots of that too. But there's definitely a good baseball trade here, and this is one of Bloom's better moves that I think he's made. This is a trade that like no one looks at as like a huge impact, but this is the kind of trade that is going to keep Boston in the race, right? Like Urias is going to have an impact on this roster, good or bad, but it very much could be a very good one to solidify that. So I like that trade.
And this is the kind of deal that Milwaukee makes, Ty. They make these deals because they don't want to spend the money on Urias moving forward. Whereas the Red Sox make this deal because they don't care about the money moving forward. They're going to be under the luxury tax. They're going to have the room to do it. That's why we see this deal.
What this does signal for me, though, Robbie, is I think they're all in on bringing Adames back in. I think that's something that might be the underlying tone here, just based on their infield depth. And, I think
Big
shortstop is a need. So I think that might be a re-sign. This one's a weird one for me, Robbie. Rodolfo Castro had a phenomenal start to the year for a guy that came from relative anonymity. Going to Philly for Bailey Falter, who we saw have a fairly significant impact in that Philly run last year down the stretch. This is an interesting trade because I think it's value for value. I'm surprised Philly gave up on pitching depth given where they're at. And I don't understand why they believe they need extra infield depth. But you know, to each their own. Obviously, these guys get paid a lot of money to do their thing, and both players I think are going to help their team. And I don't believe there's a real significant lefty in the Pirates stable right now. So adding Falter definitely helps them at least offer something in that regard moving forward. So you look at what these guys have done. You know, obviously career wise, Castro hasn't done a lot, but there's been flashes of absolute brilliance. But his career so far 226, 299, 396 across the slashes. And, you know, obviously going to be depth piece behind what's a very good middle infield in Trey Turner and Bryson Stott. And, you know, he's going to be a free agent after the season, which the question is how, as a 24-year-old. I believe that might be arbitration eligible. I'll look that one up really quick. Anything you want to add on this one?
Just the fact that I think Falter was looked at, you know, as a piece moving forward, but it was so bad to start this year that between him and Matt Stram, they were fighting for the SP5 role, and Falter lost it. But he was 0-7, 5.13 ERA. Would he get 7 starts? But he had a relief one, or I forget what it was that he did, and then he was sent down. So he's out of the organization after this year too, and that's one of the reasons why you make this deal. Both guys won't be with their teams, and obviously for Philly, he's a better one. They also DFA'd Harrison. The Phillies DFA'd Josh Harrison, so that creates the void with Castro. But at the end of the day, like, Philly's got a lot of potential pitchers in house, in addition to the fact that they always add arms as the year goes on, and again, like at the deadline. So I guess they were just done with him. Phillies have made some interesting moves with borderline type guys where they must be superstar shopping or shooting for. And then at this time of the year, maybe they just decide, you know what, we're going to, you know, see what we've got in house and just get a couple of bench pieces.
Yeah. And so just to add to it, like it doesn't really change the value, but like Falter's not a free agent until 28 and Castro's not a free agent until 29. So they both have some longevity in the orgs, but you swap.
Are they out of options? Are they out of options after this year? Maybe that's my mistake.
Maybe options. I could see them being used for that, but I think either way, both of these guys like are arbitration eligible starting in the next year or two. So, you know, I think it's just one of those ones where you just had a position flop in Pittsburgh willing to give up on a guy that really doesn't have a place long-term in that organization. And Philly probably feels the same way about Falter. So, you know, value for value in their minds, which is what you like to see. Angels acquire what always tends to be a very unsung hero in Dominic Leone. For your boy, I should say. Jeremiah Jackson.
I think he's back to being my boy now, Ty. I think Jeremiah Jackson leaving the Angels because Zach Neto took over. And now he's going to the Mets where no one is blocking him. Let's ignore Lindor. No one is blocking him with the Mets. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what to say about this. Like the relief pitcher thing, of course, like you said, Leon's solid pickup. Jeremiah Jackson is expendable because you have Zach Neto for the next 6 years. That's why you make the deal, right? Plus you've got Kyren Paris, also shortstop. The Angels have proven this year that I'm sure I've mentioned it. They're promoting from AA. They're one of the few teams that do that. You get to AA, your next step will be the MLB club. So if you're at AA and doing well, it's a good thing. And if you're Trey Cabbage, you rake at AA, get hurt, then get promoted to AAA, then wait for your turn. And then just as you're trying to carve out, MLB career, Randall Grichuk and CJ Cron come to town and you're back down to AAA for the rest of the year. But there are worst case scenarios like Jeremiah Jackson getting shipped and now stuck behind Lindor. It sucks. Jackson's trade value is going down by the day.
I really believe they're setting themselves up to trade Lindor. Like I think that's part of this because when you look at Ronnie Mauricio, who's a guy that nobody's talking about being stuck in the minor leagues, which makes no sense because he's absolutely raking. No one is talking about him. And so like you have the ability to reset that roster. I really just think they're going to do it. I think they're going to finish off this rebuild with 2 big trades in Lindor and Alonso and be reset with the pocketbooks, right? Like if you were to flip Ohtani into that team, right, and you were to deal Alonso and Lindor and reset the whole organization, like very similar to what Machado did in San Diego, right? You now have just an absolute monster to build from. The difference is that you're not building around Machado with a bunch of high A prospects. You're building around Ohtani with everyone at AA and AAA and or the pros. So, it's a really interesting story to follow in this offseason because I think if they do it, I think it would be awesome. And I don't say that a lot about full teardowns, but Leon is a guy that could absolutely help the Angels and has had some really interesting successes. Met his cousin one random time on a patio in New Orleans. Strange experience that was. Guy's like, "You're from Toronto." I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "My cousin played for Toronto." Like, very weird, like, interaction. But yeah, but I think he could be helpful and has been helpful for the Giants and the Jays before that, and the Cardinals briefly.
And the only thing I want to say on Jackson is that he was drafted in 2018. It was a second-round pick, which is why I ended up scooping him up in a lot of spots because I thought he was a good pick at the time. He has been slow rolled. 2020 COVID season hurt him, not helped him. But this year at AA, which is age appropriate for him, but experience it's not. He should be up at AAA. Anyway, 768 OPS, 15 home runs, 21 stolen bases in just 82 games. That's great baseball. Let's see what he does when he moves to the Mets and what they do with him if they leave him at AA or if they promote him to AAA. I'm not sure what their system's looking like right now, but I feel like there's a few guys getting promoted over the next couple days that may or may not deserve it. And I mean up to MLB from AAA. So we might see Jackson move up as well because I believe he played AA last year and had an injury for a lot of the year. So he's a sleeper prospect that I think long-term could be worth a look. And to your point, Ty, if they move Lindor, all of a sudden the playing time possibility between him and the rest of the crew that's currently in-house could really amp up to you could start to think about maybe 300 at-bats in the 2024 season if Jackson is moved up this year to AAA. I mean, I'm dreaming, but you got to dream. It's fantasy baseball. Just like I am on Spencer Howard, Ty, who's now a Yankee. That's right, everybody. The former second-round pick by the Phillies in 2017. Howard with just a 3-11 record and a 7.20 ERA and 38 career appearances, 29 of which were starts. This season specifically has been the worst, and he's all of a sudden becoming a relief pitcher. So now the Yankees are going to acquire him, and look out, future closer. Cash considerations are all that it costs. So
like the future closer is going to be a hard no for me. Like there's nothing I love to see more than an AL East team acquire a guy that just gets absolutely wrecked. And that's what like this is one. If you go back, Robbie, if you play the tape back, like Spencer Howard in AA, like I just didn't see what everybody else saw. And everyone thought I was an idiot for saying he was going to be garbage. And here we are. He's getting traded for cash considerations. Now, in the defense of everyone else, we also, and mainly me, said the same thing about Luis Patino, who also got traded for cash today. And segue of the day right there.
I was going to say, hold on. I thought you'd want to really dive in on that one. You just hurt yourself.
Yeah, no, I want to stop talking about Spencer Howard. I dumped on him. Now I can move on. So, Thundering Oak, I love this trade for the White Sox. I'm not done with Luis Patino. I think this is very much a post-hype guy. Obviously Tampa Bay had some successes with him. He's a locate the fastball guy. The off-speed stuff is developing. He's had a rough year coming off injury. I don't have any issue waiting a little bit longer for Patino to figure it out. I like that he's going to get a little bit of a different look from a different organization. And it doesn't suck that he's pitching in the worst ballpark ever for a pitcher. Sure. But if there's a guy that I like there, it's a guy with fastball command. And, we saw hints of Lance Lynn early on in his time in the White Sox have success with a similar, pitching style. I think Patino can do the same. I'm glad he's out of Tampa because it clearly wasn't working. Right.
And he wasn't going to get the opportunity even when they were desperate.
They're like, throw a changeup. And he's like, no. Right. And okay, we're going to trade you for nothing and maybe get some.
Well, they took him out of the starting too this year, Ty. They took Patino away from being a starter.
I think they were trying to ease him back in after injury. I think they were just trying to monitor his innings more than anything else.
Maybe that's the game they were playing.
Yeah, so for all the people out there that want to dump on Rick Hahn and the White Sox front office, who've done a reasonably terrible job overall, this could end up being a
Absolutely.
really nice acquisition here for them in the run.
Yeah. This one could be fun just because they have had success with Giolito coming up. Like, I mean, I've said it so many times. Yeah. Horrible season, but they worked with him and made it happen. And then, you know, weren't able to have any success overall, but they made him a good player, and he's going to make a lot of money thanks to the work that they did. The Rays acquired one-time Atlanta catching prospect Alex Jackson from the Brewers for right-handed pitcher Evan McKendry. McKendry's 25, 8-3, 4 ERA, 92 and 2/3 innings at AAA for the Reds. I think this is just a sleeper guy who might get a few starts next year for Milwaukee, possibly this year, but I think more likely next year. And the reason that they traded Jackson is that they've got Milwaukee traded Jackson's that they've got a legit star in William Contreras, and it's okay to trade when you've got that depth to draw from. Now, of course, Contreras will bust his hand tonight on a foul tip, and they will then need him, and the trade deadline is passed. So that is, of course, baseball. Mariners did acquire a player today, although they also traded away some. Edward Bazardo from the Orioles, who was previously DFA'd. So this one is interesting, I guess. Logan Reinhardt's the pitcher that the Mariners gave up, and he was at high A, 2.84 ERA, 10 saves, 38 innings. Not something you want, again, at high A when you're closer. So this is kind of a shot where I guess Bazardo, who has made his MLB debut, might have the option to do something. He probably has a good pitcher too, because, you know, Dipoto was a relief pitcher. I'm sure he looked at the tape. I'm sure guys in the organization looked at the tape. So that one's kind of, you know, not for nothing, just, you know, certainly not necessarily dynasty relevant at this point. But Dipoto does make moves where he's thinking long-term with a lot of players. So he might be thinking there's something there with him that they can unlock.
Yeah, agreed. And Rockies acquire Justin Brull from the Dodgers for cash. Nice that they're receiving a player that they can maybe use for cash this time. But, you know, the only experience I really have watching Brull and tapes was the last week against when the Jays were there. I got to see him just implode, and he was brutal. If I can make that
that's
one word.
a stretch.
But you know, he's been okay, like 4.07 ERA, 20 games this season. You know, they you know, in the broadcast they were talking about him in a pretty high light when he came in, and then he kind of dumped on it. But you know, this could be an interesting pickup for the Rockies, who, you know, out of all the things we dump on them overall, just as an organization, one thing they've done a decent job at is relief pitching. They've done an okay job at that over the last several years. So, you know, this is definitely a guy to watch. There's nobody else in that bullpen anymore. So you definitely have some opportunity for some good innings here. Could be a little sneaky guy that fits into that, you know, back of the bullpen, you know, slot for them moving forward. So just something to watch. Rays made a classic Rays addition, adding Adrian Sampson from the SP7 slot in the Cubs organization. This is just what they do, right? Him and Manuel Rodriguez come from the Cubs in exchange for Josh Robertson. Sampson has a 3.11 across 21 appearances and 19 starts for the Cubs this season. So, you know, that's pretty impressive. You know, in really, really good over the last several starts. So this one's weird for me, Robbie, just in terms of what the Cubs did today. Like, I just don't understand why you get rid of a guy that's been quite good, while you're also trying to make somewhat of a playoff push. It's just a strange one.
Yeah, it's not. It just, in general, it's a non-trade.
Yeah, and so they must really, really like Robertson, which again, you know, when you're adding Sampson and Rodriguez to get a Robertson who has not made a professional appearance and, you know, doesn't have the best numbers this season across 36 relief innings, it's a bit of a strange move.
Yeah, there's got to be something else going on here with that one. I did earlier mention whatever, I had the name wrong. Tucker Davidson is the guy from the Angels who's now with the Royals, who sucked 18 relief appearances with the Angels before he was DFA'd a couple days ago. Anyway, the D-backs acquired third baseman Jace Peterson from the A's for right-handed pitcher Chad Patrick. That's all you need to know about that one. The Reds acquired left-handed pitcher Sam Moll from the A's for right-handed pitcher Joe Boyle. That's all you need to know for that one. Then we can get into one that's a little bit more fantasy fun. Cubs acquired right-handed pitcher Jose Cuas from the Royals for outfielder Nelson Velasquez. Velasquez, 24, debuted in 2022. Only 13 MLB games with the Cubs. He's supposed to hit 30 bombs, and everyone's very excited. 241, 2 doubles, 3 dingers, and a 641 slugging percentage so far at the MLB level. Much better at AAA, right? 800 plus OPS guy, 15 doubles, 16 home runs. However, the Royals are not known for doing good things with power bats outside of one season of Jorge Soler. So I don't know what we want to expect with Velasquez, but this is certainly a good thing for him to move out of the Cubs because he wasn't getting a fair shake. And Ty, I just wanted to mention it again. Do you remember Matt Mervis?
Yeah, before
I like to mention that to people about prospect hype. Nelson Velasquez, same class, former teammates. But what's up with Velasquez? What do you think of this one?
I like this trade, and I mean, what I like Kansas City to acquire are power bats, and not guys that hit home runs, right? So there's what I mean by that is there's guys that hit 340-foot home runs. Nelson Velasquez, Jorge Soler, Vinny Pasquantino, those are not those guys. Like when they hit home runs, they go. And Velasquez certainly fits that cloth. He's a near replica of Jorge Soler. So
I thought you were going to say magical.
No.
No? Okay.
Definitely not. This is a guy that I've liked for a long time, Robbie, and Velasquez. Power numbers are elite. However, the contact rate is the problem. So if Kansas City can fix that or even improve it, even just an improvement here for a guy that's hit, I believe about 260 without pulling it up in front of me across minor league system, right? But with a ton of home runs, there's a real major leaguer here power wise. So it'll be interesting to see whether they can turn that corner with him or if he becomes like the next guy, AJ Pollock, and is just a shell of a guy running around the outfield later in his career.
Career minor league numbers for Nelson Velasquez. You said, sorry, what was your average prediction? 260 something? Oh, shoot. I only have MLB 210, but we've got a 235, 231, 288, 270 season, and the 288, 270 season, as well as the 241 season were 400 at bats, 306 and 425, which is the bulk of his minor leagues. So he should be, with good health, he should be a better contact hitter, in addition to the fact that he can hit dingers for days, because he's got career minor league numbers 19, 25, 45, 50, 60, 76 dingers in the minors in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and change seasons.
256 batting average. I feel like that's pretty close to 260. I'm pretty happy with that prediction.
Yeah.
79 OPS.
Approve.
Yeah, I think there's, like I said, they have to improve the contact rate. That's obviously the feast or famine scenario here, but there's a potential guy like a Jose Bautista here, power wise, right? So you obviously are asking for a lot to turn that corner. Teoscar Hernandez would be a similar guy, guys with immense power that just didn't have the right contact rate is kind of the profile I'm looking at here. And that's what you got here. So if there's an absolute sleeper to look at out of this day that has upside that's above the rest, Velasquez certainly power wise is that guy. We talked Pollock really briefly. He's heading away from your Mariners, which that signing was awful to begin with. Heading to Seattle,
start to finish.
Yep. So somehow the Mariners are going to get a player to be named later, which they believe to be better than AJ Pollock and Mark Matthias, which is an interesting one. Pollock, we know who he is, whether he plays or not. Matthias is organizational depth here. So the guy coming back is going to be a nothing in all reality. So nothing to see here. Cubs get Heimer Candelario in a, where were you in 2016 type trade scenario here. They send, a couple interesting prospects going the other way, Robbie.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin Made for me is a guy that I'm watching, a international signee a few years back for the Cubs, was one of their high-end guys that they were looking to turn up the system. he was 14th in the MLB pipeline, but he's only hitting 240. So all the stuff I've read on Made, Robbie, and I've watched a little bit of film on it. I don't see what this article said, but the numbers certainly align with what the numbers say. Just can't lift the ball. Like everything else is good, but not putting the ball in the air enough. So what I really like about this trade for Made is you're getting him outside of an organization that clearly can't do anything for him, getting him into an organization that has done a very good job with international signings, right?
Yes.
So I think that's one thing that I'm excited about. I know less about DJ Hers, but he's a 20-year-old. Nope, sorry. He's a 16th ranked project. And it has been sub 4 in 59 innings at AA, right? So,
Yep.
Again, the Nationals doing a really, really good job of rebuilding the farm and prospects to support the trades that they made last year. Just good work out of that front office. As always, they've got a great front office in Washington.
Yeah, you're happy when you sign Candelario and he works out to trade you, or sorry, to become trade bait so that you can get the multi-years of control out of a 20-year-old like Made. The trick now is, like you said, turn Made from a contact hitter into a MLB level contact hitter, hit the gaps, do those things you need to do so you can get that OPS up. But again, he's 20 years old and he's a former J2 pick. So he's an interesting one, but again, victory for the Nationals to be able to make that move. And best news of all of this, Ty, Jake Alou should now be up with the Nationals, who's somebody I was talking about this offseason as a potential dynasty darling. It didn't happen to start the year, which, Candelario's the one that blocked it. I said it when it happened. Like, it's unfortunate, but let's not let that ruin a good thing. Carter Kieboom is clearly out of the good books of the organization. I mean, that was a long time ago, but Alou might benefit from this. Stone Garrett, who's having a decent season, he was another guy we talked about this offseason. He can benefit from the trade deadline and freeing up roster spots. And Alex Call with Washington could continue to try to carve out a bit of an MLB career. He's going to obviously need to improve his overall line, batting a little bit over 200. A few steals, a few dingers. He's going to need over the stretch to be a little bit better. But some good things that could happen from the Nationals and making a move where they sign a guy like Candelario, they make a move to get a couple prospects. It does free up more at bats the rest of the season for some of these other guys who are up, and now Alou getting to be up, and we could see good things there. Brewers acquired Mark Canha because they just cannot stop themselves. Thank you. Okay, right-handed pitcher Justin Jarvis going back the other way. Jarvis was like their 30th ranked prospect, which means we don't really care. He was in AA this year. This is so sad. A 10.80 ERA and 11 2/3 after he got promoted. Prior to that, though, Ty, 75 2/3 innings, 3.33 ERA. Tell me about a guy who can't handle veteran hitting more than a guy who goes from AA of managing baseball games to AAA rough, rocky start. Justin Jarvis either is going to be adjusted with the Mets or he's going to be just in the organization for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, the reality here too, the strikeout numbers were good all the way through the minors. So, like for me, I think you had a bump into AA, and I think that started this year as well, where the numbers were quite good. The whip's still a little high, and I think that's it. Like to me, I see a signal here for a little bit of control issue, and I think there's just enough to be excited about what he could be. Still projects for me as a reliever, so I think that's why Milwaukee's happy to move off him. But next on the list, one of the weirdest trades for me. And I mentioned this to you before, Robbie, Paul Sewald going to the D-backs, strengthening their side. Now, to Mariners' defense, like bullpen help is not what they need. So this trade definitely, was a decent one in their favor. Arizona gets a closer or at least a back-end arm for a couple years here, free agent in 2025. So one more year here for or two more years.
And he's going to be expensive next year.
Yep, absolutely. So, a classic move. It's obviously part of the Chafin trade, I think, is part of why they're moving some money around.
Absolutely.
I think all of that kind of comes together. Helps them. Giving up Canzone is an interesting move. Bliss is a lot to give up. Josh Rojas is a lot. So definitely a really good return for a reliever, closer that throws like 91 miles an hour, which is really rare in today's game. So like I don't love this trade for the D-backs. We talked about trusting Arizona earlier. This is the type of trade that makes me trust them less. Just because Canzone's a lot to give up. for Paul Sewald, in my opinion. Now, other people might disagree. I'm just not a Paul Sewald guy. So interested to hear what your Homer take says on this one.
Sure. So for Bliss, he's like a less thought of prospect, but he's just hitting really well between AA and AAA, 332 this year. So cool. Second baseman projected for big leagues, but projected for big leagues. We'll take it. Now, this is the best part and the part that you should love the most about this trade. You trade away your closer in Paul Sewald, who I think had 22 saves at the time of the trade. Now, Andres Munoz, who has been waiting patiently, is your closer. And how old is Munoz? He's 24. Then you've got Matt Brash, who's 25, who will be your next up guy. You've got a veteran in Justin Topa, who's there. And then you've got Saucedo, Spire. You got guys. You got arms in Seattle. But what you just added was a couple of players that you actually needed. And Rojas is just going to become a utility guy on the bench. And I wonder if they thought that they were going to have something interesting going on today where, Teoscar was going to be dealt. There were rumors that he was going to be moving to Minnesota. Ty France was possibly on the move. I can't imagine they would have been able to make that happen because the Mariners would have needed legit things back for a guy like France. Obviously, Teoscar would have been more of a money dump because it just hasn't been a good year for him. He's hitting in the last third of their lineup instead of the first third where I'm sure he thought he would be. But Cade Marlowe's up because they got injuries. And other arms and outfielders and prospects and players are all moving around with Seattle right now. But the one good thing, like you said, is that bullpen is a rock. And that was the problem with Dipoto for a few years when he was with the Angels and then moved to Seattle, was he wasn't building a bullpen. And I couldn't understand it because the guy was a closer with, of all teams, the Rockies, but he was a closer in MLB for a while. And you'd think he would understand that mind frame. But I like this deal. I think this is going to be a good deal long-term for the Mariners. And obviously obviously the Diamondbacks are getting the bonus of a guy who can come in the ninth and close the game. They've tried to do that over the past couple of years, bringing guys in. Oh man, who was the veteran they brought in last year? Thank you, Mark Melanson, who just couldn't do it for him. So Sewald should be able to get it done. And Sewald was found money. He was a Met that was like either DFA'd or just a free agent that went to AAA with the Mariners a couple years ago, came up and he was found money with them. They got 2 quality seasons out of him. And then this year up to the point they traded him, great return to Poto. Boom. You nailed it. But anyway, Ty, move on to one that's a little more fun, exciting for baseball purposes. Aaron Savale, who's got years of control left, leaving the Guardians, who I know you're not a Savale fan, but what do you think about the fact they got the Guardians, got Kyle Manzardo back? Manzardo was one of those prospect darlings that just hasn't been great. But what are your thoughts?
Highway robbery. I think the Guardians absolutely robbed the Rays on this one.
They made some interesting trades at the deadline, right? Get Khalil Watson, get Kyle Manzardo, Cleveland.
Like I really like what Cleveland did here. I'm scared to say it because Savale, anybody going to the Rays, especially weird arms like Savale, always scares me because the Rays are just really good at it. But giving up Manzardo for me is too much. Like you have a really, really good, safe bat and a guy that they say can't hit for power, but everything about him, size, swing, says there's more power in that bat. I just don't believe that it's not going to come around. And one of the more advanced hit tools in the entire minor leagues. So I don't believe that this is a trade that we're going to get backwards on from a Manzardo acquisition perspective. And I very much believe that giving up Savale is in the best interest of the Guardians on top of that. So
absolutely it is. Yeah. 2 years of control. And he's been really good, but exceeding expectations. Like you said, he's not as good a pitcher as he's been pitching. And Manzardo is the opposite. He's a prospect who was like, player of the year for the Rays last year, like minor league player of the year for them last year, 1,000+ OPS, 22 dingers, and then went from high AA to AAA this year, just turned 23 and is being outmatched. But he's also, if you want to argue it, handling it from an OBP standpoint. That's your highlight here, 342 OBP. The average is below 240. The slug is under 450. But you're allowing that to adjust for what has been a 22-year-old who just turned 23 and is at the second highest level in professional baseball in AAA. So I like the deal for both sides because we don't know what the hell Tampa does, but they make it happen, right? So Savale going there helps anyone who has him. I traded him away in a league last year, and I remember a few people were like, that was an interesting trade you made. I'm like, well, Savale is, I think, pitching better than he's been, and I didn't want to deal with it anymore. I can't remember what my return was on the deal, but I was like kind of glad to get rid of him. And then the guy in this particular league was able to extend him, and he extended him at almost triple what his salary was. And I thought, interesting. And I guess I should go back and have a look. But I really like what Cleveland did with some of these moves because they didn't take a step back because, like I said earlier in the year, they had so much depth to draw from with their pitching that they would be able to do these kind of things in trading starters. Even with Bieber going down, which I'm sure is not at all what they would have liked. They probably would have preferred to make a trade with the Rays and given them Bieber and got, Manzardo plus back. If they could have, really swung it. But either way, Savale out the door is a good thing because they still have a legit 5-man rotation with others in the weight.
And this is kind of what I was talking about earlier with the Jays, right? Like I think obviously Shapiro and Atkins in Toronto come from the Cleveland front office, and I think both organizations have, in Cleveland's probably the best at it, have done a really good job of staying competitive, right, while trading very good players away. And so I think that's the one thing that I think. The only difference between Toronto and Cleveland at this point, or there's two differences. One, Cleveland has no money, Toronto has money. And then the other part of it too is that Cleveland had a farm system and Toronto's rebuilding theirs. So like I think this is a model we will see from Toronto's front office eventually, right? But they've offset it with a lack of upper tier prospects by going and spending a bunch of money to get them there. So I like
well,
this
Toronto
strategy.
bought the rotation, right?
Correct.
Sorry to interrupt. Toronto bought the rotation, Cleveland drafted it. And we're starting to see the fruits of the labor for Cleveland where they can trade from their drafted rotation and then add to their surplus of,
Correct.
minor leaguers. And, then they can pick from position players at the minor leagues. Whereas Toronto's going to find themselves very soon needing to continue to do what they do, which is get a position player or two through free agency like they did George Springer, they traded for Matt Chapman. But again, addressing the needs because the system's not there to do it for them and bring the guys up outside of a couple of positions, catcher, Vlad and Bo.
Exactly. And next up on the list, we talked about some of this stuff a little bit, but Giolito going to the Angels is a guy that you've always really liked and had a soft spot for.
And Lopez I've had a soft spot for, even when he struggled. He hasn't been great this year, but good the last month.
He pumped 101 last night, which
he had a save, Ty.
Yeah,
he had a save.
We've always talked about Lopez, and the thing I've always flagged on him is the fastball. The fastball's there, fastball's located. He's as good as anybody. Problem is it's not always located. So the big part of that trade was Kai Busch going to the White Sox. They also got Nastrini in that trade as well, but Kai Busch is a big piece. You had Patino, you had a couple of the other pieces they have in the lower minors as well. Verga, what's his name? Verga,
Nor Verga, or Vera, but he hasn't pitched this year, or maybe he's only pitched like less than 10 innings. He's had an injury, so he's more of a sleeper type. He was a Cuban signing a couple years ago, but yeah, he's interesting. I mean, this will be a fun spring training. I mean, we're months away, but this will be a fun spring training for the White Sox as to who's possibly going to be in that rotation if they don't go and sign a bunch of crappy veteran pitchers. We could have some fun conversations.
I'm excited for upcoming drafts. There's some good ones that I've got lined up as well. The rest of the teardown for the White Sox, Lance Lynn, Joe Kelly going to the Dodgers. They also picked up Kiki Hernandez and Trace Thompson went away from the Dodgers. But
Thompson went to the
White Sox.
Where did he go? Trace Thompson went to the White Sox. He was the headliner in the deal for Lynn.
If Trace Thompson can ever be considered a headliner.
Well, he was really good last year, but he was like lightning in a bottle.
Minutes.
Clearly. Yeah.
But that's his thing. He comes up and he has
maybe like a tea sandwich. He had like a tea sandwich.
Definitely not. He got a hoagie. Just a big old
bigger.
hoagie. Yeah, but that's the point. He had a food coma right after, and he fell asleep and just stopped hitting. So it's exactly what happened. Cleveland had Thor for Ahmad Rosario in one of the weirder trades we saw, but also one that makes sense on both sides of the fence. And then just a straight reliever flop. Miami San Jorge Lopez, or got Jorge Lopez in exchange for Dylan Floro, who Floro probably had some attitude problems just watching the rest of that bullpen just dump and him being really good and never getting the
Yeah,
opportunity
it's
for the leverage roles.
such a weird trade, right? Because like Lopez was very good with Baltimore up to his trade to Minnesota last year. And then it was like, move over Yohan Durazir. You're like, don't worry about it, Jorge. And it's as if he's like, well, when I'm the man, I'm better. If I'm just one of the men, I'm not as good. And yeah, like you said, Floro's one of the best or the best non-AJ Puck reliever in that bullpen. And he's shipped out and he's got control left. And I think Lopez does not. I think he's out after this year. But either way, it's just kind of an interesting trade. And the Thor trade, just like I know we mentioned it earlier, the Ahmed Rosario one, Rosario's depth with the Dodgers, and that's what they need. So he goes there, and he's making, I think, $7 million, and Thor's making 13. So maybe the Dodgers leveled that off financially. I don't know. It probably doesn't matter much. But again, it's project for Thor with Cleveland, and it's depth with the Dodgers with Rosario.
Well, and they needed a shortstop, right? And Rosario is a terrible defensive shortstop, but the Dodgers don't care. They just need somebody that's not Miguel Rojas,
or Mookie Betts.
Yeah, well, I mean that's it.
They would like to not have Mookie Betts at shortstop, which is a thing.
They just score a ton of runs and they have decent pitching. Like they don't care if one run is saved a game by their shortstop. Like that's not what makes the Dodgers good. So I like that trade for them. They didn't deal any of their major prospects today. That I think is the big news out of Dodgerland is they're still good. They got better and they traded nothing of significance. And so the Dodgers just keep being the Dodgers because they can be. But yeah, I mean, a lot happened today. We talked about a couple big things. I'm excited about all of my shares in Manzardo and Khalil Watson that I have, which got better today. And I'm apparently a Guardians fan now. So that's that. But yeah, we're good. A lot happened. If you want to hit us up at DingersPod on Twitter. Let us know what you thought. Let us know who you're most excited about. And if you want to know who to draft in your upcoming draft seasons, you can always know where to find us. But until next time, it's been Rob and Tyler.